Please be seated. Right, ladies and gentlemen, moving on. Do we have any apologies, please? Mr. Walker.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Philip Hickson.
Mr. Stanton.
Councillor Sandhu, Councillor Hussain, Councillor Turner, Councillor Martin.
Hillary and Mike Carr.
Thank you. Okay. Any declarations of interest? Sorry. We got the... Oh, sorry. Sorry, Ruth.
Councillor Nater is caught up in a traffic jam. Will be here.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. Minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the Council held on the 28th of January 2016. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Eldred, all those agreement? Meeting of the Council held on the 3rd of February 2016. Can I have a... Thank you very much. Announcements from myself. I have two announcements tonight. Councillors, it's my sad duty to report to you the recent passing of Michael Mallender. Over the years, a great many of you will have come into contact with Michael, who for several decades served as a co-opted member on the Council's Conservation Area Advisory Committee. After a distinguished career in the legal profession with Taylor, Simpson and Mosley in this city, Michael was deeply respected by all those elected and otherwise, who he sat alongside on the committee, as well as the conservation officers who benefited from his experience, advice and counsel. This chamber customarily stands and observes a silence in respect of former councillors who we have lost. Given Michael's long-standing voluntary services to this authority, I will shortly be asking that we pay the same respect to him. Before I do so, would anybody like to speak about Michael? Councillor Wood.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I've been on the Conservation Area Advisory Committee for 35 years, and when I joined it 35 years ago, Michael Mallender had been there a lot longer than that. That is the sort of service that is given to this council. He's also given professional, pro bono, free of charge, professional advice to umpteen different voluntary organisations, not only in Derby but throughout the county. I have the honour to be chairman of Derbyshire Historic Buildings Trust, and he was our legal advisor there and has over the years saved us a fortune. He was quite a character, as anybody who ever saw him speak will know. He always gave advice staring up at the sky but with his eyes shut, as though in prayer. He always brought the Conservation Area Advisory Committee to think about things, because we said, oh, nobody can see it, it won't matter. And he'd always say, but you can see it from the top of the cathedral tower. Since he resigned from that committee, we often now have to say, can you see it from the top of the cathedral tower? Because Michael Mallender would be asking that, and now he'll probably be looking at us doing that. He served this city tremendously well, and it was a huge shock to see that he'd died. Thank you.
Councillor Titley.
Yes, I can't hope to equal that contribution from Councillor Wood, but when I came on to this authority for the first time in 2004, it was really reassuring to see that one of life's characters still remained with us, and Michael Mallender was that. His knowledge of architectural history was second to none. It was rather like listening to the late Alec Clifton Taylor give a narration on a given building or structure. he always struck me, there are many people one meets in life, but he will live with me. There are a few characters in this world, but he was certainly one of them, and I think we're the poorer for it with his going.
Thank you. Any further? Yeah.
He's as fellow councillors said, he was a character and very much a gentleman, and I think he definitely deserves a little time from us all.
Thank you very much. And there are no more. I would ask that we all stand for a few moments, please. Thank you. My next announcement is one that I talk about with pride. Many of you will remember that in 2012, that Lewis Mighty, a young 7-year-old resident of Mackworth Estate, sadly died of cancer. This made me realise that because Mackworth was built in the early 50s and that all the churches were built at the same time, there is no form of memorial. Unlike other estates within the city that were built around villages and churches. I made a promise to the residents of Mackworth that I would get one built that would serve not only as a memorial to those killed in conflict, past and present, but would also be a place for quiet reflection to remember their loved ones sadly no longer with us. If you remember, in my mayoral speech, I said that I would stand shoulder to shoulder with our boys and girls, past and present, serving in Her Majesty's forces. As I promised, I have already had the island at the bottom of Bradshaw Way renamed Royal Lancers Island. And it gives me great pleasure to formally announce that Mackworth Estate will have its own memorial in place outside of the library by early spring of this year, the first in the city for many years. It is currently being sculpted by Peter Maris. I would like to pay tribute to the children of Brackensdale, Reigate and Murray Park who participated in this design. And I'm looking forward to its erection in the early spring. Thank you. Moving on to item 6, statements of council cabinet members. We don't have any. Questions from the public to council cabinet members. Mr. Cooper, do you have a supplementary question to your question? Mr. Evans, do you have a supplementary question to Councillor Afzal? Mr. Bacon, do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Afzal?
Job one of us have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. I have. Councillor Afzal, based on an uptake of 224 extra customers per year for the garden waste scheme, it will take the city 35 years to reach their target of 20,000 customers. Why don't you admit your error and reduce with immediate effect the £40 charge to the lowest possible charge to incentivise take-up of the scheme?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Bacon. That 20,000 was a figure that we arrived at, that we'd inspired to. But the main thing was we were the taxpayer was actually making a saving of £1 million, and we've actually succeeded in doing that. And we are always looking at other options and trying to engage with more of our residents to take up the scheme. And as you can see from the answer I've given you, we've done that. But that is not an exhaustive list, so I'd like people such as yourself who are passionate about recycling and the garden waste to do your bit. I know I'm aware that you're on a lot of different bodies and everything, so we all need to work together. Thanks very much.
Mr Cooper, do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Afzal? Mr Evans, do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Afzal? Mr Bacon, do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Afzal?
I was just waiting for my light to light up, sorry. I have, Mr Mayor, thank you. Councillor Afzal, based on current waste data from DEFRA and noting future recycling targets being put forward by Europe, which we are still currently part of, I consider we are paying around £4 million more towards the construction of the plant than we should, which could have been spent towards a replacement towards Moorway swimming pool. Why is the council accepting paying an unfair share, considering we also have to house the plant?
I don't think we are, Mr Bacon, because if you look at the bottom paragraph of your answer, the council and the Derbyshire will be saving over £2 million a year, and that's the minimum amount we're looking at. And so in this time and day and age when we're trying to get stuff away from landfill, I think it's a very good proposition, and I'm sure you will agree, but I don't know why you keep feeling it necessary to have a go all the time, because you know it's a good thing.
Thank you. We'll now move on to council questions for the Cabinet. Councillor Graves, do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Rawson?
Yes, Mr Mayor, thank you very much. Councillor Rawson, the contract required 100% of participants to be economically active, yet JET reports said that only 33% were. Why was the full amount paid when 66% of people were not in the target population?
Thank you, Councillor Graves, for your question. As you'll see from the written response, the accountable body for this particular EU grant is Lincolnshire County Council, and they were completely satisfied that all the criteria of the bid had been met. So it was an issue for Lincolnshire County Council really as accountable body to decide whether they were happy with the outputs. Thank you.
Councillor Poulter, do you have a question for Councillor Afzal?
I do, Chair, yes, thank you. Previous to this, when we've asked questions about cameras in the city before, you've used the grounds for safety as the rationale for doing this. The answer to this question tonight makes it clear that you now rely on the word of mouth of the bus companies, and there are no records of any complaints from the public to bring to this council. Is it not the case that the truth behind this policy is the continued pampering to the whims of the bus companies, and that you're waging war on the motorists to create a fines cash cow for your own use? Mr Mayor.
No, Councillor Poulter, you're wrong again. Parking Contravention 47 is clearly not being met with, and that is the reason. And before we actually started issuing the tickets, and your question actually refers to the Morley and London Road, we'd actually issued 700 warnings prior to anybody getting a ticket. And since the tickets have been issued, what we found is the problem is going to solve itself. And the main concern should be is the safety of the passengers, and also making sure our city centre is kept clear of congestion, and I think we're succeeding in doing that.
Councillor Holmes, do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Rawson?
Yes, I do, Mr Mayor. Can you confirm how many concerts, entertainment or similar events are scheduled for 2016?
I don't have that information to hand, Councillor Holmes, but I can certainly forward that on to you.
Councillor Kerr, do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Rawson?
I do, please, Mr Mayor. Thank you for this very thorough answer, which I appreciate. I note, though, that the feedback listed all starts from November last year. Why wasn't any feedback given earlier to enable better planning by schools and others?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Kerr. As you'll be aware, the issue of the potential closure of Moorways due to the government cuts was on the agenda this time last year. Unfortunately, it was being considered at that time, and there was a certain amount of publicity around that. We were able, thankfully, to find the funds to extend the life of the pool for 12 further months, which obviously was a very positive thing. Fortunately, we've not been able to do that this year for a further 12 months. But as you can see from the answer, there has been an extremely comprehensive communications process with schools, clubs and users of the pool. It may be that if we go back further from November, this information is just from November onwards, then I'm sure that there was communication before November, which I can find out for you if that would be helpful, Councillor Kerr. But as you can see, there has been a very full and complete consultation and information giving exercise carried out.
Councillor Harwood, do you have a supplementary question for
Yes,
Councillor
Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Councillor Wilson, I'd like to thank you for the apology you've given me for failing to carry out what you agreed to do at the last council meeting. That's appreciated. However, other councillors have said to me that they also have never received replies to questions that have been put to Cabinet members at the full council meetings. In view of that, Councillor Wilson, can you ensure me that questions to Cabinet members will be answered within a reasonable time in the future?
Yes, absolutely, Councillor Harwood. As my written response says, I did ask officers to provide you with that information, so I'm sorry that didn't happen, and in future all questions will be answered in an appropriate time frame.
Thank you. Councillor Graves, do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Hussain?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Hussain, for this strange reply. You have singularly failed to answer the question. Can you provide
Councillor Hussain's not here, I think, is it?
Well, I'm assuming one of you can do it, or are you,
Councillor Banwait will answer it.
blinkered and you don't know how to answer his questions for him?
Councillor Banwait will answer it for you.
Can you provide the actual figures for how many carers are affected in this way?
Councillor Graves, the question has been answered. It's clearly not given the political points that you want to score on this issue. But, you know, there is a lot of hypocrisy from you. And let me answer in terms of your, you know, what you're trying to say in this council chamber and actually your record. And if you look at UKIP's record on housing, on private renting, Labour recently put forward plans to require all landlords to ensure rented homes are fit for human habitation, meeting basic standards, including being free from vermin and having working boilers. Yet those modest plans were voted down by the Tories, and Douglas Carswell, your solitary representative in Parliament, your champion, supported the Tories on that. Labour tried to stop the government changing the law to undermine stable family homes by forcing councils to restrict tenancies to a maximum of 5 years. UKIP's Douglas Carswell again sided with the Conservatives and voted to end security for council tenants, and that's another fact. On local homes for local people, UKIP's manifesto may have promised to prioritise homes for those with connection to the area, but when UKIP MP Douglas Carswell again had the chance to vote for Labour's plans to give local people first dibs on new homes built in the area, he didn't even bother to turn up. So stop playing politics on an important issue of housing.
Councillor Kerr, do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Rawson?
I do, thank you. I was hoping when I crafted this question to emphasise what projects within Derby's boundaries, and we haven't actually listed any projects there. So although I don't expect you to have the information here, it would be really useful if you could find it project by project? Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Kerr, I'm sure that that is possible. And just to reiterate, the EU funding coming into Derby over that period of time is £16 million, all investment that's gone into Derby. So perhaps worth pondering at the forthcoming EU referendum, another good reason to vote to remain in the EU. And Councillor Graves, before you say that they're just giving us our money back again, then under the present Tory government, I think that's the only source of funding we are going to get from any sort of central government, so I think we should stay.
Councillor Graves, do you have a supplementary question to Councillor Bolton? Councillor Graves, do you have a supplementary question to Councillor Banwaite? Shucks. Councillor Graves, do you have a further question to Councillor Banwaite?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I presume this is the one about the 20 complaints. And thank you for the answer. Again, you've said 22. It's interesting that you seem to have dug into some of the people that have actually put the complaints in. I'm not really sure how you get 11 of them are UKIP councillors, because there are only 2 of us, and there were 3 complaints from UKIP councillors. The others are not candidates until they actually sign a piece of paper. But however, the question is, obviously 50% have nothing to do with UKIP according to your answer, so maybe you can tell me a little bit about them, please.
Councillor Graves, just to correct you, of the 22 complaints, 50% have come from UKIP, and as it's defined in the response you've had, 3 from yourself, 1 from Councillor Wright, 4 from UKIP candidates, and 3 people we suspect to be UKIP supporters because they have been seen associated with you, and that's an answer prepared by a monitoring officer, so I don't think I've gone out of turn of saying that. But for a party that positions itself on saving taxpayers' money, I can't think a bigger waste of taxpayers' money than abusing the process of this council, wasting taxpayers' money, the officer time, the legal time, by making unfounded accusations. And it proves the point again, just like your pathetic question on housing, here's another absurd process. You waste money, you waste time, valuable time of officers, and at a time of austerity and cuts, that is an abuse of your position, Councillor Graves, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
Final question, Councillor Graves, to Councillor, well, he's not here, Councillor Hussain, so I'm assuming that if you have a supplementary question, the leader will respond. Right, that ends the question, so I'm going to move, I skipped to item 8, it's the questions relating to the Fire Authority in Derby Elms. There are none. Item 9 we've done. Item 10 is the minutes of the 4315 of the Licensing Committee held on the 21st of January 2016. Councillor Jackson, will you be moving this, please?
Yeah.
Those in favour? Yeah. Thank you. Minutes of 156/15 of the Council Cabinet meeting held on the 10th of February 2016. Treasurer's report. Councillor Banwaite, will you be moving this, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I move as printed.
Those in favour? Minutes of one. Sorry, Councillor Banwaite. Did you put your hand up? Minutes of item 15715 of the Council Cabinet meeting on the 10th of February 2016. Council plan. Councillor Banwaite.
Move as printed, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you. Item 13, minutes 160/15 of the Council Cabinet meeting held on the 10th of February 2016, contract and financial procedures matters. Councillor Banwaite.
Move as printed, Mr Mayor.
Great. Item 14, Council Tax 2016-2017.
Councillor Skelton.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Skelton.
Mr Mayor, I have an amendment to make.
To item 14?
14, yes.
Okay. Well, I have a statement to make before we come to that, so, which is now we're going to move to that, and that we approve Derby's council tax. Members have before them a report with all the details. As required by statute and under Council Procedures Rule CP 71B, this matter will be subject to a recorded vote. Okay?
Should we just have the person presenting the report?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
So we're going to... Who's doing it? Councillor Banwaite, do you wish to say anything before we move to the report?
Councillor Skelton.
Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wish to amend paragraph 2.1, and I think there are copies of maybe available, may not be available.
Sorry.
I have got the microphone on. I will read the amendment out. So on 2.1, removal of the following words in the third line, transferred to the budget risk reserve for future consideration, and add the following words preceding the final sentence. Council notes the impact of cuts to local voluntary sector organisations and asks Cabinet to reassess these with the intention of continuing some funding up to £172,351 to some organisations which currently end in May 2016.
Councillor Skelton, we just want clarification from returning officer, please.
Monitoring officer.
Sorry, monitoring officer.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify that Councillor Skelton is proposing an amendment to a recommendation. The CP rules, this isn't an amendment to a motion that you're all familiar with in terms of the paperwork, but this is an amendment that Councillor Skelton can put forward by way of debate, as opposed to it being a motion. So the normal rules on amendments as motions won't apply to this. This is a debate scenario only. If it assists, if you had difficulty hearing Councillor Skelton, I can read out the proposed additional sentences that you're trying to, if it assists. What Councillor Skelton has indicated is that the report is to be amended by the removal of the following words from paragraph 2.1 of the recommendation, in quotes, and will be transferred to the budget risk reserve for future consideration. Councillor Skelton is then proposing, for subject to debate, that the addition of the following words preceding the final sentence of paragraph 2.1 of the recommendation will read as follows. Council notes the impacts of cuts to local voluntary sector organisations and asks Cabinet to reassess these with the intention of continuing some funding up to £172,351 to some organisations which currently ends in May 2016, with the priority of reducing demand on the Council advice services and maximising additional income into Derby via grants and additional benefits. Are we circulating this? For ease, Mr Mayor, we can put this on the screen so that everybody can see it. It's quite a complicated suggestion being made by Councillor Skelton.
Please do.
Thank you. Sorry, just for clarity, it'll take us a couple of minutes to put it on the screen, so we'll do that and then everybody can see.
Martin.
Mr Mayor, can I ask if the meeting's been adjourned in any way, or are we continuing?
Sorry, Councillor Holmes, we're just waiting to email the proposal from Councillor Skelton so that we can get it on the screen. So it is
Thank
just
you.
the technology. There's a time delay in this room.
Okay, we seem to have problems with the technology.
Do you want to adjourn?
I'm going to adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes while photocopies are made, and then not 10 because I don't smoke. So I'm going to adjourn it for 5 minutes. Thank you. Please be seated.
Do we approve the report as printed or not?
Councillor Skelton, do you wish to continue?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hopefully people can read what's on the screen. But, well, the gallery anyway.
That's a bum,
It's for everyone in the city.
Yeah.
The
Just let
£172,351 obviously is on the second line within the recommendation. It refers to extra money that we have got from the government for this coming financial year. We believe that this money should be put to good use, and we feel a good use would be to relook again at some of the voluntary sector organisations that have or are due to lose their funding in May of 2016. And we believe a particular priority should be to reduce demand on council advice services and maximising additional income into Derby that comes via people being able to get the correct benefits and other advice and such like, help with debt relief, etc., etc. The numbers of people, certainly in one organisation, that receive help and advice like this is over 10,000 people every year. Welfare rights and other issues like debt counselling and a myriad of others as well. And also it has to be remembered that millions of pounds are brought into the city's households via this service. And the actual money that the council has up until now outlaid to run this service is small in comparison to the benefit that the city actually receives in the round. We therefore feel that every effort needs to be made to make sure that this service continues. It is help that is vital help for people who are often facing an absolute crisis in their life. This money obviously is available. We didn't know at the last full council meeting that this amount was going to be available. We do now know, and therefore it's, I think, incumbent upon us to use that money sensibly and wisely. And I feel that this particular use to help some of the most vulnerable people in the city is the best use that we could use the money for. We're therefore asking Council Cabinet to look at that and take on board what I've just said. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Ballard.
Mr. Mayor, whilst we agree with the spirit of the points that Councillor Skelton has made, the advice we've received from the monitoring officer, the council's lawyer, our Section 151 officer, the finance director, is that to do what Councillor Skelton is asking for us to do would not only be legally challengeable, it would also be financially irresponsible. It will be legally challengeable in the sense that, having undertaken an extensive consultation to set the budget, you're now asking us to pick out a certain number of voluntary sector groups to give this funding to at the expense of others. That will potentially open us up to legal challenge, accusation of discrimination, because clearly some groups would gain at the expense of others. The second point is it will be financially irresponsible. Councillor Skelton, I'm a bit disappointed and a bit surprised having to remind you that the weekend just gone, the headlines in all the papers, in all the news, was about the Chancellor saying there's more pain and agony for the public sector to come. There are further cuts on the horizon. And every time that the Chancellor has said that, public sector has been hammered, and local government particularly has borne the brunt. We are in some ways in a fortunate position, after a massive amount of effort and work from elected members, from council officers, working in partnership with our stakeholders in the city, that we have managed to balance the budget. And may I remind you, Councillor Skelton, we took a delegation down to London to meet Marcus Jones. We opened up our books, explained our financial position, and the government had no answers to that. They fully agreed, and in fact, our chief exec spent 2 days being grilled by the Sir Humphreys of this world, and it was exactly like that. They can't argue with our numbers. They actually have commended, under difficult times, we've still managed to balance the books. But the reality is, we have been able to set a sustainable position for the next 3 years. But if the government announce further cuts, we're going to need every penny at our disposal. We are still in a very, very dangerous financial position. And if we do what you say, it would also be a waste of taxpayers' money. You might get through a few months by protecting some of those groups. But when that money goes out, through going through that process, we are back to square one. But there are opportunities on the horizon, and the opportunities we've said, as Councillor Repton said at the Cabinet meeting on the voluntary sector Cabinet report, that the opportunity for the voluntary sector is there are statutory functions of this council that we can't cut. You know, we simply we're not allowed to do that. There is an opportunity. There are tender opportunities. In fact, you'll find at the next Cabinet meeting, we will be, in a particular report, there'll be a couple of opportunities that we will be looking to go out to tender. We've also approved a welfare strategy, and part of the opportunity in that strategy is that we will be looking for a voluntary sector group or one of our partners out there to deliver money advice to some of the most vulnerable residents in Derby. And potentially that contract could be worth up to £100,000. Again, this is a statutory function. And this is what we've been saying all along, is we have to make cuts in discretionary services. It's the Barnet graph of doom that's come to reality. And Barnet Council, you know, and hopefully everybody's seen that graph now, predicted when austerity first began, when government cuts first began back in 2010, warned the country that with government cuts and the rising cost in delivering statutory services, councils will simply run out of money to deliver discretionary services. In other words, that's funding that legally we choose to do, not that we're required to do by law. Some councils have reached that point earlier than us. Some, they're going to face it over the next year or so. Many Conservative councils have already faced it. That's why they've managed to get £300 million. And I know we'll be debating that point in the next, when the motions come up. They've secured £300 million. They're all right. They've managed to use their relationship with this Tory government to secure £300 million. The Prime Minister's own constituency has benefited. So the voluntary sector groups are fine there. So when people say to us, well, Oxfordshire aren't cutting their voluntary sector, well, I'm not surprised. One, they don't have the same demands as urban authorities like Derby. And secondly, they've just gained a slice of £300 million. When we've had to make cuts of £116 million, and we have another £45 million savings to make, and George Osborne is yet to talk about more cuts. So yes, we do agree with the spirit of it. There are opportunities in the voluntary sector, and all I would say to the voluntary sector groups, watch that space. I am pleased to say, Mr. Mayor, that the Chief Executive of Citizens Advice Bureau is having a meeting with one of our officers, a gentleman sat over there, this Friday to talk about the future. And I'm optimistic the future, because there are opportunities. And what I would encourage the voluntary sector groups to do is to come in, start meeting our officers. You know, we'll open those doors for them. You know, find out the criteria, because obviously with statutory functions will obviously come a certain amount of requirements that they've got to fill. That's what they can do in advance. So, Mr. Mayor, there are opportunities there, but this is all about fair deal for Derby. And I don't want to steal the thunder on the debate to come, and I know there'll be an opportunity for all us to talk about the Fair Deal for Derby campaign and the injustice of the £300 million that Conservative authorities have secured from David Cameron and George Osborne. So on that basis, Mr. Mayor, we move as printed, and I'd like you to put to the vote, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
I've had a proposal that we move to the vote. Okay, seconded.
It has to be a recorded vote.
So it's got to be a recorded vote. So, David.
There is no voting on amendment.
Move as printed.
This is just the rules of debate.
Well, it's not, you can't amend it. It's not an amendment.
It's not an amendment.
It's not an amendment.
You can't amend it.
It's just a report that you're debating.
Mr. Mayor, we move to the vote.
Yeah, we're going to move to the vote as printed, please.
If members would please indicate whether they are for or against the motion or the recommendations as printed in the report. As I call out the names, please. Councillor Afzal. Councillor Ashburner.
Against.
Councillor Banwaite.
For.
Councillor Barker. Councillor Bayliss. Councillor Bolton. Councillor Kerr. Councillor Carr. Here is he. Councillor Dinser. Councillor Eldred. Councillor Froggatt. Councillor Graves. Not here. Councillor Grimmadell. Councillor Harwood. Councillor Hassel. Councillor Hazelgrave. Councillor Alison Holmes. Councillor Matthew Holmes. Councillor Ingle. Councillor Jackson. Councillor Keith. Councillor Jangir Khan. Councillor Shiraz Khan. Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Martin. Councillor Nater. Councillor Nawaz. Councillor Poulter. Councillor Raju. Councillor Rawson. Councillor Redfern. Councillor Repton. Councillor Ralston. Councillor Russell. Councillor Sandhu. Councillor Shankar. Councillor Skelton. Councillor Stanton. Councillor Titley. Councillor Turner. Councillor Webb. Councillor West. Councillor Whitby. Councillor Williams. Councillor Winter. Councillor Wood. Councillor Wright, not here. Councillor Mayor, Mr Mayor, Councillor Pegg. It's not.
Recommendations are carried as printed. Item 15 on the agenda. Councillors, we approved changes to the Council Constitution in November and agreed then to receive the updated financial procedure rules, which have now been agreed by Audit and Accounts Committee. Councillor Hazelgrave, as Chair of the Committee, will you move this motion?
I do so move and move that it be passed as printed.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just 2 points of clarification, if I can seek them. In B3, the accounts, I understand there was some difficulty or some delay in previous year's accounts being signed off. Maybe that's the wrong terminology, but signed off by the auditors. Could I have clarification on where we are with that? And also in C 2.7, can we just have clarification on where we are with the level of reserves and in terms of how low they can go before the monitoring officer has to stop the spending? Thank you. Section 151, Officer Duper.
Mr Mayor, in response to the second element of your question, I would have to consult with the Section 151 officer and we can get a response to you after this meeting, as this item is about approving the financial procedure rules rather than particular items of the budget. In respect of the Council's accounts, as all councillors will be aware, we report on a very regular basis to the Audit and Accounts Committee. This Council has a conditional governance statement, and that is currently preventing the sign-off, as you quote, about the accounts. Again, all of the material is in the public domain and it is via the Audit and Accounts Committee, should you wish to read that. I don't know if Councillor Hazelgrave has any additional comment.
I'll give such information as is necessary, if necessary, at a later stage.
Okay. Can we move those then? Thank you. Item 16, annual general meeting. Monitoring Officer to
Mr Mayor, I would like to withdraw this report as it appears that it's no longer the consensus of members to move the date of the annual general meeting to the 25th of May. Therefore, the annual general meeting will remain as the existing date of the 18th of May 2016. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on then to item 17, a motion on mental health. Councillor Repton to move.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Mayor, mental health historically has been a Cinderella service compared to physical illness, receiving less funding, less understanding of the nature, causes and effective treatments, whether they be pharmacological or psychological. Things improved during my 25 years in psychiatry, and I saw many improvements, but sadly there's a long way to go to break down the pockets of ignorance, prejudice, and to target increased financial resources at preventative initiatives and therapies which would effectively help those suffering mental illness to lead as full, active and rewarding life as possible. And I believe that this is something we must aim for. 1 in 4 people in this country as a minimum will at some stage in their lives suffer from some mental health problems. We'll know people personally, whether they be members of our family or friends, who unfortunately suffer from this. But we need to break down that ignorance. We need to make sure that there are the facilities, the understanding and the help, whether that be in the workplace or indeed in the wider community. And I certainly am more than happy and willing to take on board the role of ambassador to move this forward in terms of the challenges I think that we face. So I would like understanding and support from all members of this authority and of this chamber to make sure that we move forward and try to address these many problems that mental health throw up both in 2016 and in future years. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Carr.
My colleague isn't here.
So just very briefly, Mr Mayor, I'd like to just commend the work that Councillor Repton is doing in this area. It's incredibly valuable, and bringing to the forefront and into the public domain issues of mental health is extremely important, and I can think of no better person to be our mental health champion than the Cabinet member. And I formally second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. I also very much support the aims and objectives of this motion. The raising the understanding and highlighting the importance of mental health issues is obviously something that Liberal Democrat Norman Lamb MP did during the coalition time. And this is continuing that same theme. However, I think it needs to be strengthened, and I therefore have an amendment to say that we should need an action plan to deliver these intentions. We have a list there of 7 points, all of which are achievable, but they will be challenging at this time when we haven't got a lot of capacity within the Council. And therefore I think it's important that we make very clear what we are trying to achieve, and so that officers are clear about how we are going to achieve that. So I hope it will gain support across the chamber, because this is something we need not just to talk about, but we need to achieve.
Do we have a seconder for Councillor Kerr's motion, amendment?
Councillor Skelton.
Do you wish to speak now? Okay. Wait.
Mr Mayor, our group will support the amendment. We think it does actually boost the spirit of the motion as printed, so we will support the amendment.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This group will be supporting this motion as amended. You know, it's something which we all feel very strongly about. I think it would be remiss not to mention that the government feel that way too. You know, it's important that we tackle mental health and put it as on the same level as physical health, treat it with the same importance and the same priority. But of course, more needs to be done, so we welcome this at a council level. What I would like to just point out in supporting this is our Derby North MP, Amanda Soloway, is hosting a mental health day event called Forward Thinking on the 13th of May here in Derby. to raise awareness and highlight the issue to an audience not familiar with mental health issues. Ministers and MPs will be in attendance. I think that's a worthwhile date to put in your diary if you are interested in this issue and taking it forward. Thank you.
Councillor Titley.
I commend the Cabinet member for the proposal he puts before us and the amendment. Speaking as somebody who's experienced depression on 2 occasions in their life, I think that this is a very key thing that we should do, and it's high time. Mental illness, or depression if you want to put it that way, in my case is something that is not visible, but it is there. And people who suffer and experience that, particularly going back 20 or 30 years ago, were thought to be, well, we better get on with it. Well, I am of that view in terms of how I treat my life, or try to be. But there comes to a point where people cannot do that. And we need to be in this council, irrespective of political colour, championing this cause and taking it forward. So I thank you for bringing it to this council.
Councillor Banway and then Councillor Neils.
Mr Mayor, I have to respond to what Councillor Holmes said.
You've
already spoken. Sorry?
Got to speak again on the amendment.
Okay. But
Councillor Dinser.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I also welcome the amendment and the original resolution? Also to say, Councillor Repton was one of the signatories to the Mental Health Crisis Care Concordat, which was led by the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner and the Mental Health Commissioning lead in Hardwick CCG, which also highlighted the issue of parity of esteem between physical health and mental health. Not only is it a challenge, and funding needs to be equally applied for the long list of points that were raised in the resolution here, but also in terms of the fact that people with mental health and learning needs are more likely to be sucked into the criminal justice system inappropriately. And the Mental Health Crisis Care Concordat work, which is a jointly co-chaired by the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner, Ariel Dinser, who seems to be myself, and Dave Gardner, to progress how we can actually stop people with mental health related issues being sucked into the criminal justice system, and if they are victims, that they are appropriately accessing appropriate services and mental health services. So there's a lot of work going on in there. Councillor Repton was a signatory on behalf of the City Council, and all the other local authorities and criminal agencies and health agencies signed up to that, and I hope that can be incorporated in the work that this resolution is going to be supported under. Thank you very much.
Councillor Skelton. You've got anything more to... Okay, then, so we're going to move to the vote on the amendment. Those in favour? Flouse. Thank you. Back to the substantive.
As amended.
As amended. And I am now going to allow Councillor Holmes to speak. I'm going to let Councillor Banwait speak. He's been polite. There's something going off here I don't know about.
Mr Mayor, thank you very much. Look, it's great listening to the Tories and saying that they're standing up for the most vulnerable in the city, but let's have a look at their record. Let's just, and I think the best way. Well, let's set the record straight. Let's see what the top psychiatrist of the country has to think about the Tory record. And this is where one of the benefits of having the internet on your phone. And I quote here: Britain's most senior psychiatrists today warn Ian Duncan Smith's cruel benefit cuts are having a disastrous impact on people with mental health problems. The Royal College of Psychiatrists accuse the Tory Work and Pension Secretary of, and this is a quote from this expert, unjust and ineffective use of threats and sanctions against people who cannot work due to their poor mental health. So isn't it a case that your champion, Amanda Soloway, is simply exploiting a very, very important issue by showing on one hand that she's the champion of the vulnerable, but actually, in terms of actually making decisions that further the interests of the most vulnerable, you're doing completely contrary? You've got a welfare state now that actually penalises the most vulnerable in the city. So again, you're just as guilty as Councillor Graves, and he's gone now. That's how much he thinks. It makes the point. We were talking about Carswell not being at crucial meetings. He's made his political points, and he's gone. He's left. He's left the meeting. Just as you, the Tories, again, trying to use a very, very important, sensitive issues. Why don't you deliver where it matters? Why don't you engage your MP to talk in Parliament about changing the legislation? And that starts with not cutting the welfare state and penalising the most vulnerable people in this city. So don't you dare try to, on the one hand, take away the people's benefits, the only support mechanism they have to lead an independent life and to get the treatment they do so desperately need, and then sit in this council chamber with your platitudes and somehow say that you're on their side, when you're clearly not on their side. You support austerity. You support cutting public services. You support cutting the very support that people, especially with mental health, desperately need that support. So you should be ashamed of yourself putting this forward now and speaking on that today.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Oh, Councillor Banwaite, dear me. You're at it again. Look, I've got the background information here that I wasn't going to raise because I didn't want to politicise this most important debate, but I think I have a right of reply. You know, this government is investing significant amounts of money. 11.7 billion invested in the NHS last year for mental health care, and a 54% reduction in the use of police cells for mental health cases in the last 3 years. 1.25 billion for perinatal and children, young people's mental health, helping professionals to intervene early. And in the autumn statement, an additional 600 million was announced to ensure that significantly more people will have access to talking therapies, crisis care, that kind of thing. And also another 150 million pounds to support teenagers with eating disorders. These are all things which this government is doing, Councillor Banwaite, if you pay attention. Things which you should support. So you're talking nonsense. This government is making this issue a priority and is delivering. Now, on Amanda Soloway, she's not here, so I can't speak for her, but I know that she is championing this issue in Parliament. She made reference to it in her maiden speech. She's held meetings with Alistair Burt, the mental health minister. She's running a marathon on behalf of a mental health charity. She's holding roundtable discussions with local mental health charities. She's hosting the day here in May for this. And, you know, she's actually a part of a joint committee on human rights, which she holds a seat specifically reporting to the committee on mental health issues. All of those things she is doing in Parliament, Councillor Banwaite. So get your facts straight. This government is taking this issue seriously. It's putting significant money into this issue. We should not be politicising this. It's regretful that I had to point these things out, but yet again, I cannot allow you to spout the nonsense you spout without some kind of retort from the Conservative benches. Thank you.
Councillor Bayliss.
Mr Mayor, I'll just pick up one point that Councillor Holmes has made. Human Rights Act, isn't that the one they're trying to abolish?
Of the substantive motion as amended. Those in favour? Those against? There's abstaining. Motion carried. Item 18, financial settlement. Councillor Banwaite to move.
Yes, Mr Mayor, just a slight change on this. We have consulted the monitoring officer because we've got a similar motion 22 from the Liberal Democrats being proposed by Councillor Carr and Councillor Kerr, which actually, you know, we agree with the same cause. What we'd like to propose is amalgamating the two motions, and I think Mr Walsh is on the board. And what we've would like to put forward is that I propose and Councillor Kerr second. Councillor Carr, has been said earlier in the meeting, is unfortunately, I think, is off sick today, and I did speak to Mike, and I hope he gets better soon. Yeah, so that's the new motion. So it, as I said, it replaces the one further down. It amalgamates the two together. So I propose, and Councillor Kerr will second. If obviously, if you can put that to the meeting, and then I formally propose this motion as been put together on the screen. I'll leave to Councillor Kerr to second that.
Okay.
Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, I hope that'll be acceptable to everybody.
Does she reserve a right to speak?
Reserving your right to speak, Councillor Kerr.
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else want to speak? Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We've talked earlier on, Mr Mayor, previously about the injustice of the Conservatives securing £300 million for mainly Tory areas. And those authorities, mainly in the south and in the south east, including the Prime Minister's own constituency. And maybe we've got Mrs Cameron to thank Mr Cameron's, the Prime Minister's mother, that signed a petition to save children's centres in Oxfordshire. So clearly we could use her influence here in Derby, so maybe we should be writing and saying, look, please, use your magic here to secure us a slice of this £300 million. And I know the outcry from councils that haven't secured this funding, and these are mostly Labour councils up and down the country, are asking questions, rightly so. What is the criteria for this funding? How has this funding been allocated? Because there is a serious allegation that this is in somehow a bribe for those Conservative areas that wouldn't support further cuts until they got this settlement. And it was an attempt by the Prime Minister and George Osborne to secure their support. And certainly with George Osborne potentially looking to succeed the current Prime Minister, this is an opportunity for him to get the support that he needs. Either way, Mr Mayor, it's an absolute disgrace when Tories come into this meeting and talk about funding for mental health when they're supporting the worst cuts that we've seen to public services in our history, and actually supporting the allocation. And remember, we've got a Tory party here that won't support Derby's Fair Deal for Derby, so they won't support our council's attempt to secure fair funding, fair and equal funding, so we can keep the voluntary sector going, so we can keep discretionary services going in the city. They've said that. They wouldn't support the Fair Deal for Derby campaign that Labour proposed several years ago. They wouldn't support the Fair Deal for Derby campaign that we put forward at the last council meeting, and now the Liberal Democrats and UKIP have. So they're completely isolated themselves. But clearly, I suppose, they think it's acceptable to support a Tory Fair Deal for Derby campaign for other Conservative councils. So it's only because they're not in power that they won't support a Fair Deal for Derby campaign here for our city. Of course, what they'll talk about is actually, well, what need is there for this money? The country's fine. And if you listen to the Prime Minister, the country's been doing well. Councillor Holmes has talked about all this funding that's going into public services, in spite of the fact that in no way compensates for the massive cuts that public services have received since this government came to power. But let's see an example of some of these areas of the country that are on the up, where the sun always shines. And I've got some interesting information here about one such area. And let me just give you some interesting facts. And I'm just interested to know if you can guess what part of the country it is. It's a part of the country where a total of 42 homes have sold for more than £1 million in the past 2 years. So can anybody guess? The average home there, in this area, sells for over £1 million. And that's a 17% rise over the past year, making it Britain's top millionaire village. Its population, and you might think the population must run into the hundreds of thousands. Actually, the population is over just 4,200. It has, and according to this promotion, now I'm reading a promotional material, so it's encouraging people to go and see this area and maybe rent a holiday home. It has decent schools. It has a private sports club. It has riding schools, and it has numerous golf courses. It has a station from which trains go directly to London Waterloo, making it prime commuter hotspot. It is Britain's second most exclusive village, where 34 homes sold for more than £1 million. It is, I have to say, Mr. Mayor, it's a place called, it's a village in Surrey called East Horsley. Well, you have heard of it now because it is one of the areas that have secured a slice of this £300 million. Can please someone tell me, why does East Horsley, millionaire's paradise, needs a share of £300 million at the expense of urban authorities like Derby, at the expense of the voluntary sector that have seen their cuts here, because it comes from the same part? You support this party, they're in government. Do you support that? You clearly support. I mean, I'd be interested to know whether you're going to stand up today and say, actually, this £300 million is unjust. Derby should get a slice of that. And you want to therefore support this council, because remember, you're isolated yourself. The Liberal Democrats, UKIP, Labour have all joined together because they see the injustice of this government. So are you now going to make a stand to stand up for the services you've talked about? I mean, my understanding, you were at the meeting, the call-in on the voluntary sector, particularly around Citizens Advice Bureau. It's only a few £100,000 what you'd be saying. This is £300 million. What justification is to give £300 million to Conservative authorities? And Conservative authorities, as I said, Mr. Mayor, that are some of the wealthiest in the country. East Horsley. Unless, of course, you're looking to retire there, Councillor Wood. Are you planning to retire there? And clearly, you know, they have a great need there, and perhaps you're all looking to retire there. So, Mr. Mayor, it is completely unacceptable. And I wonder if your supporters, those supporters that are here, you know, maybe here to celebrate your campaigning, think that's acceptable. Yeah, have a go at the council for making cuts because its grant's been cut from central government, but then celebrate the fact and not recognise the complete contradiction that this very government talks about austerity as awarded £300 million to Conservative areas. Mr. Mayor, any sane person, any person that believes in public services, that believes in this city, of course thinks it's completely unjustifiable. So, Mr. Mayor, this is another attempt to ask local Conservatives to join us in a Fair Deal for Derby campaign, and specifically around this issue, to challenge this government and see what justification, what criteria have they used, what formula have they used to award this funding. And I'm sure Councillor Kerr will now make some points that I think we'd be interested to hear, Mr. Mayor, and also we'll be looking to support as the Labour Group. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. It's quite interesting to be able to support the same set of words, but certainly not quite a lot of the words that went in terms of promoting them. My understanding, and I may be wrong, is that the councils were chosen to gain that funding because they had been hardest hit in this particular round of cuts. Now, that is what I understand. I haven't been out and analysed it. But even so, I'm afraid I feel it's the government that has actually brought that problem upon those councils. The government is continuing to put an upper limit on what you can do in terms of increasing council tax. If they took away that limit, then councils which are full of wealthy people and expensive homes would be able to increase their council tax and be able to gain that additional funding in a different manner. But that is not what this government has chosen to do. And therefore, it is missing an opportunity, and this is why we are where we are. I think it's more important to look at the absolute levels of funding and the absolute levels of need. And this is the second paragraph, or perhaps it was the third paragraph, where we're actually looking at why we are missing out. I would have included a suggestion that we look and work through the Local Government Association to do this lobbying, but given that we have got a split here between some councils that are gaining and some councils are not, that is more difficult to challenge. But still, we know, on behalf of our people living in Derby and other authorities like ours, we know that we deserve more funding. And therefore, I think it's right that we actually ask for that support so that people in Derby are not in such hardship as they are at the moment, and so that we can reinstate some of the services that I believe we should be reinstating, particularly those that are being delivered by our voluntary organisations, which will now be struggling.
Thank you. Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to highlight the specifics of what it would actually mean for Derby if we were treated the same as Surrey. If Derby had been given the same £23 million as Surrey County Council had given in so-called transitional relief, some of the things that we would have been able to save from our recent budget would have included keeping more ways open to a cost of £214,000 every year. We'd have been able to keep all 17 children's centres operated by the council. We'd have been able to keep all voluntary sector grants in place, including the Citizens Advice Bureau, at a cost of £773,000 annually. We'd have been able to keep our festive lights and Christmas lights at a cost of £114,000 annually. We'd have been able to keep all our school crossing patrols at a cost of £147,000. We'd have been able to keep the Osnabrück Envoy exchange going at a cost of £158,000. We'd have been able to keep all the public toilets open at a cost of £50,000. We'd have been able to continue the Darley Park concert and bonfire night at a cost of £173,000. And we'd have been able to have kept neighbourhood working, the funding for boards and forums. And after all of that, Mr Mayor, we would still have had over £20 million left remaining. It's absolutely disgraceful. I've never known any government so blatant in their fiddling of the formulas to favour their own political heartlands. It really is truly appalling. There's no consideration of need. In fact, the complete opposite, Mr Mayor. This Tory government's been giving funds to the wealthiest areas who need it the least. This Labour group, Mr Mayor, is going to make it our business to tell every single voter in Derby what the Tories have done. How they've deliberately starved Derby of funds. And, Mr Mayor, we're going to make sure they pay at the ballot box.
Okay, I'm going to move to the amendment. Vote on the amendment, sorry. Those in favour? What's it joint the two together? Okay. I'm now going to ask for a vote on the substantive as amended. Those in favour, please.
Mr Mayor, recorded vote, please.
Will members please indicate whether they are for or against the motion as I read their names. Councillor Afzal. For. Councillor Ashburner. For. Councillor Banwaite. For. Councillor Barker. Abstain. Councillor Bayliss. For. Councillor Bolton. For. Councillor Kerr. For. Councillor Dinser. For. Councillor Eldred. For. Councillor Froggatt. For. Councillor Grimmadell. Councillor Harwood. Councillor Hassel. Councillor Heselgrave. Councillor Alison Holmes. Councillor Matthew Holmes. Councillor Ingle. Councillor Jackson. Sorry, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Keith. Councillor Jangir Khan. Councillor Shiraz Khan. Sorry, Councillor Shiraz Khan did. Okay. Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Nater. Councillor Nawaz. Councillor Poulter. Councillor Raju. Councillor Rawson. Councillor Redfern. Councillor Repton. Councillor Ralston. Councillor Russell. Councillor Sandhu. Councillor Shankar. Councillor Skelton. Councillor Stanton. Councillor Titley. Councillor Webb. Councillor West. Councillor Whitby. Councillor Williams. Councillor Winter. Councillor Wood. And the Mayor, Councillor Pegg.
Motion carried. Thank you. Item 19 on the agenda is the electoral cycle. We have several seconders to this motion as required under CP 66 of the Council Constitution. However, I should make it clear that I do not intend to extend the normal rights to speak to seconders to each and every one of those members listed. If one seconder among you would like to reserve their rights to speak, then I'm happy to accept that. And I understand that Councillor Banway will move this item.
Yes, Mr Mayor. If Council will recall, at the last Council meeting we all talked about the importance of looking and reviewing the electoral cycle. The point's been well made that the current electoral cycle is outdated. It doesn't provide the city sustainable leadership. The business sector find it very frustrating. And there are also financial benefits of changing the electoral cycle. It will save considerable amount of taxpayers' money, Mr Mayor. We agreed to, as a council, to formally to review and to start the consultation, but the Conservatives put an amendment, and inadvertently it was agreed, but the amendment delayed the start of that consultation. So I hope that's not an indicator of the fact that the Conservatives will not be supporting a change in the electoral cycle. So this is about correcting that, Mr Mayor. So by approving this motion this evening, the consultation would start tomorrow, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a second for that, please? Councillor Rawson. To speak.
Formally second, Mr Mayor, and reserve my right to speak.
Councillor Matthew Holmes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've already expressed my opposition to this process being rushed, in my view, directly to Councillor Banway and the Council's Chief Legal Officer. I don't see any reason or need to carry out consultation prior to the elections, nor was there previous agreement to do so. The motion agreed at full council as amended was supported by the vast majority of councillors, including all Labour members, and was very clear and non-political in nature. And there was very good reason and logic behind my amendment to the motion. It certainly wasn't a political motivation, and it secured, as I say, cross-party support, with the exception of a few councillors, which is something quite rare in this chamber. The justification for the motion brought this evening to negate the previous one is the basis that it will avoid unnecessary delay. Well, I'm arguing that common sense demands a pause in the process, and I'll tell Council why. It's clear from Councillor Banwaite, he said that what he said tonight and previously, that he wants to put pressure on others to declare their position on this, and clearly wants to gather support for his preference of moving to all-out elections. I mean, he's well within his rights to do that politically. However, this is about council process, not what the Labour Party or its leader wants. And again, I'll tell you why. This issue is not about whether all-outs or thirds are the best option. This is about the farce that would ensue by pressing ahead with consultation now on this issue during the election campaign. Doing so risks breaching PERDA that starts at the end of this month. In fact, by bringing a motion on this subject to force consultation to start as soon as possible tomorrow, it makes it even more likely that PERDA will be breached, in my opinion. The political heat is instantly turned up, and this is an emotive political issue, and it's going to become a politically controversial issue. If we've been debating this, we would have been debating it anyway during the election campaign. It would have been in the local press, it will be in the local press, it will feature in the forthcoming campaign, because obviously Councillor Banway and Labour are going to make it a pledge that they feel, which is again in their right, to move to all-outs would be the best thing for this city. But with the consultation during that campaign, under that context, will put this council in a very difficult position with regards to PERDA. It's highly likely, in my view, that DCC Legal will have no choice but to pause and postpone the consultation anyway during the PERDA process under those circumstances. And why risk it If we carry out public consultation, then hold a meeting to have a considered debate and a vote on this issue in the new municipal year, what is the issue with that? We're talking about a small delay of 8 weeks or so. And there's no formal cut-off date for this council in terms of agreeing a move to all-outs prior to any notice of an election. Even if, that's something which the council decides, 2/3 of the council decides to do. And there's more than enough time to carry out consultation and hold a meeting in the new municipal year to allow any change of electoral cycle to be put in place, if that's what council wants. The realistic time frame to agree a change is roughly before or during September, the year prior to moving to all-out, if that's what the council decides. And that would just be based on pure logistics of the organisation of the authority and obviously political parties preparing 51 candidates instead of 17. Nothing else. There isn't some kind of a date we're trying to meet here to rush this consultation through. So with all this in mind, there's just no credible justification to press ahead. And we're not opposing any particular move to all-outs or remain at thirds. This group has a free vote on the matter. We want to debate this in a timely manner, but one that's in a calm way, and everything is considered and has consultation carried out at the right time. One final point, and this is probably, we don't need to be debating the issue here, but you've just said, Councillor Banwaite, that we'd save money. Well, actually, it's my understanding that whether we stayed in thirds or moved to all-outs, there's no real difference in cost. And that just proves that we need a considered debate about this. Well, I would say I'd call on the legal officer to actually clarify that, because it's my understanding, if you need a CP 65, I'd ask the legal officer to clarify whether she feels there's any difference in cost, all things considered, between all-out and thirds. Thank you.
Speak first.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. This group also has a free vote on this, but then we have a free vote on nearly everything anyway, so that's fine. That's fine. Sadly today, yes. For me, the biggest issue here is the effort and the credibility that our consultation has. People across any area on any subject usually come back and say, something's changed. Were we consulted? And it's very difficult to consult with people in your ward. The 10,000 voters in your ward are difficult to consult. The 250,000 people in Derby are difficult to consult. If we think we can do that at the same time as people are actually trying to think about local elections and a European referendum, the idea of us being able to make an impact to talk about changing the voting system in Derby, when all the national media are talking about a European referendum, we will get subsumed below it. And I don't know whether the DCLG, who I understand oversee this sort of process, will actually consider that a consultation going on at this time actually has a validity. And I think this is a very important issue. For me, it is something that helps define the effectiveness of democracy in this city. And democracy is something that is close to my heart. And I think we need to give consultation on this subject proper space to do that. It doesn't need to be done alongside other activities, whether local or national or European, and it doesn't need to be done over a summer holiday. As has been stated, we have time that if we are moving forward with this, we won't be having an election, I presume, until 2018, and that gives us a generous 18 months to be able to reassess what we should be doing. So we don't want to undermine democracy. We want to respect our democracy, and we want to respect our consultation processes. So please, let us stay with the decision that we took, and from the point of view of this group, we understood what decision we were taking at our last meeting, and we were pleased to make that as the council's decision. Let's uphold our last decision, and let's give respect to the people of Derby and debate this issue properly.
Councillor Russell.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. very briefly, I'd just like to respond to a couple of things that Councillor Holmes said in his contribution. I think, you know, we need to be clear about this, and the Labour group have been very clear about this for a while. Our position as a group is that we support moving to all-out elections. That's not a secret. We've spoke about it in this chamber before, and we've spoken to our constituents, our residents on this issue in the past. I don't see a problem with us opening this consultation now. The sooner we open it, the sooner we can reach a conclusion. There's a very long process to go through, a statutory consultation period where people will be consulted. And I think using the excuse of PERDA is a really poor one, actually, because, let's be honest, there's an EU referendum debate ongoing. Do you think that's going to stop because of PERDA? No. You know, there'll be continuing debate about the EU referendum right through till June, which will go through the PERDA period, which is a massive issue of political importance to do with the government, and councillors, I'm sure, will be asked their view on that. Just as councillors will be asked their view on whether or not to move to a 4-yearly election cycle. And I think the real reason, Councillor Holmes, that you don't want to launch this now is because you don't want to tell the people of Derby what your thoughts are. I've never heard you say in this chamber whether you support or don't support moving to a 4-yearly election cycle. And I think it's a bit of a running scared process like you've been through before once already, Councillor Holmes, when you ran off from Chellaston to Micklehove. So we can see here again you running scared from an issue that you don't want to debate.
Councillor Titley.
Yes, Mr Mayor, thank you. I sat on the Resourcing and Governance Scrutiny Board about 3 years ago, and this matter was debated. There was no real conclusion to the outcome. In fact, it was almost a free vote in our own party, because the late Councillor Dave Roberts was vehemently opposed to it and I was vehemently for it, which is not too surprising. But I think the substance here is this, that there was clearly a demonstration that money would be saved each year. The second point is that business and other partners would prefer to have political continuity, and that's not been mentioned tonight but was mentioned in the previous debate we had when we last met as a council, and that's actually very vital. So there is a saving in that, and the saving is this, that we save ourselves making ourselves look disjointed and irregular in terms of our leadership, because it can and it has changed so regularly. And the third thing we save is a lot of time and money and fripperies on electioneering, when we actually do need to focus on the matters in hand, which is running this council in a very difficult position. Not necessarily being out there politically campaigning, yes, listening to our residents as one does and other people do. So it's quite clear the argument here. From my recollection of those findings, we would save money. Political continuity is vital to business and other stakeholders, and we ain't wasting the time, and officer time more importantly, having elections when we don't need to. To continue in the current way would be prosaic and seen as wasteful by the population of Derby, I'm sure. Thank you, Mr.
Councillor Stanton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Many of the points have actually been made quite eloquently there by Councillor Titley. I too have sat on 2 reviews, even in my short time in this chamber, of overview and scrutiny committees into this issue that have proved to be unwilling or unable to make solid recommendations to this chamber due to the difference of opinions of those boards. However, we're just kicking the can, and I actually think that we've done an awful lot of thinking about this, and we should actually start making some decisions on this. And I don't think we should ever, as local councillors, be afraid to tell the people of Derby where we stand on this or any other issue. To Councillor Kerr's point, do I think that the people of Derby are capable of thinking about 3 things at once? Yes, I do. I think actually we often misjudge and underestimate the electorate. They can actually multitask and consider these things. And in fact, one of the things they do reiterate to us on the doorstep quite frequently is they can't believe we need to ask them 3 out of every 4 years which party they want to support in the local elections. They just want us to get on with the job and run the city. And so I think my personal view, and always has been, is that I would be in favour of all-out elections. And the only thing people of Derby believe is there's too much petty politics. I can't see the gallery from where where I sit, but I'm guessing it's not packed full of people. And actually a lot of the speeches, is it heaving? Sorry. And a lot of the rhetoric and stuff that goes on in here is, by and large, goes missed by the public. We all love politics, we're all involved in it, but they aren't. They just want the city run to the best of its ability. 4-year terms, give us a mandate. 4 years term, give any party a mandate and allow business to invest, allow confidence in leadership, allow us to be judged against our own manifestos and our own mandates, see whether we've done what we said we would. And so I've always been in favour of that. And the sooner we get on with it and get on with actually making a decision, instead of kicking the can down the road and saying, oh, we'll decide after you've told us which party you want to vote for in this little election, I suggest we just get on with it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wood.
In many ways, I can declare a non-interest in this, in that I've already determined that I won't be standing for election again. So I don't care whether you do it once in 3 years or every year or every 10 years, as long as there's still something called democracy in this city, which is rather important. Nobody from the Labour benches has explained why at the last council meeting they voted for the Conservative amendment, and something's happened in between that's made them all change their mind. I'd be interested to hear why they've had this Damascene conversion of opinion, and why they suddenly want to rush the electorate of Derby into a consultation process, which you will start. You will then be legally advised that it's purdah and you'll have to stop it. Then you'll have to start it again, all at a time when people actually in Derby aren't terribly concerned about us at all. Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem or anything else, because they're all concentrating on leave or remain the EU. We will have a fight to make people turn out to vote in May, because they will have other things on their mind. They'll think the election is on the 23rd of June. Those are quite hurdles for a lot of people. I'm not saying that the people of Derby are stupid. What I am saying is that you can tackle one big issue at a time, and you will give far more concentration on this particular issue if you do it as a one-off, a proper consultation that lasts properly, and we listen to the consultation. Councillor Russell has asked us all to declare where we stand before the consultation. That's a total contempt for the people of Derby, and total contempt. It's total contempt for consultation. By consultation, you mean this is what we're going to do. We're giving you a chance to speak on it. We're going to spend money, wasting money on asking you, but we're not going to take any notice of what you say. Like Councillor Russell isn't taking any notice of what I'm saying now, because she's trying to talk over me, quite unconstitutionally. There is absolutely no point in starting consultation tomorrow on an issue which a lot of people couldn't give a monkey's what have you about. So, please take your time. It really doesn't matter what the result is, but let's listen to the people and let's ask them when we've got time to do it and not rush the issue.
Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do think that obviously with local council elections, PCC elections, EU referendum, that this very, very important debate does run the risk of being crowded out. Obviously, a lot of the media are full of the EU debate, even now, and it will be only getting more and more. In fact, we'll probably have issues with trying to get some of the local election issues out and into people's minds, let alone talking about what electoral cycle we have. I mean, I am fully committed to having that debate, and I look forward to it, but I think we need to have it in a more calm atmosphere, not in a time of election campaign, but straight after that is fine.
Okay, thank you. Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, just to reassure everybody, I think the point has been well made. I think the electorate can think of, can multitask. In terms of what we were talking about, we were talking about starting the consultation, and actually the consultation's been ongoing for many years. This is not a new issue. Overview and Scrutiny have been involved in this process for many, many years. Numerous reports have been commissioned on it, which has answered all the questions that Councillor Holmes has talked about, whether this is cost effective or not, and all the benefits. That process has been done. The Derby Telegraph have made it clear that they think this is beneficial, changing the electoral cycle. Our business community have been crying out for many, many years the importance of, have been quite clear. I mean, the Renaissance Board that I attended, which is made up of businesses like Rolls-Royce, Toyota, all our major employers in the city talk about their frustrations of the current electoral cycle and just want stability. They've actually said to us, look, when are you going to get on with this and look at this issue? So when you talk about the people, I mean, I don't know who you refer to, certainly the public mood out there, and the people that employ most of the residents of the city, know the hindrance of the current electoral cycle. So they just want to see an administration to get on with it and take that leap of faith in actually having the consultation, having the debate and making the decision. And in terms of making the decision, well, the decision is going to be taken in July. That'll be after the EU referendum, the actual debate, the actual meeting, the extraordinary meeting. And we could actually say, let's have the extraordinary meeting, in July, after the EU vote is taken. The elections are then, well behind. The local elections are then well behind us. In terms of making an election issue, I mean, that's for the public to judge. I know the Telegraph have particularly been asking individual councils where they stand on the issue, but that's a matter for the Derby Telegraph. They think it's an important issue. They clearly think their readership is interested in it. They clearly recognise the mood of the business community out there, as I heard, as I said, when I've been out there in business events, and whether it's talking to business leaders at Renaissance Board. So, we're not trying to politicise this, we're simply trying to say, let's get on with this. Why kick the can down the road, has been said. And in terms of the timings, whether it be an election, if a member of the public wants to simply say to you, well, what's your record on it? I'm going to vote for you whether, they could be saying, actually, we're not going to vote for you if you are for an electoral cycle. Well, that's a matter for them. This is about simply, getting on with the consultation. I think the timing's absolutely right, and I think we should give the public credit for making some big decisions. But in terms of actually when they will exercise that decision, that's up to them. But as I said, the debate's been out there for a number of years. But Mr. Mayor, I can reassure this council chamber, we will not take the extraordinary meeting until after the EU referendum is out of the way. So that will be done and dusted. The local elections will be well behind us. Then we can have an extraordinary meeting dedicated just to this item. So I think there's sufficient time. There's sufficient material already out there, various reports that have been commissioned for councillors to review and look over. And I'd also encourage them, as I said, Mr. Mayor, to speak to the business community, as I have done, and I hope that they do go out there and talk to members of the Renaissance Board and other members of the business community to talk about what their view is, Mr. Mayor. So I think it's a perfect timing. I don't see any issues in that, Chair. So, Mr. Mayor, I would like to, on that basis, move to the vote. Thank you.
Okay then, we're going to move to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Motion carried. Item 20, neighbourhood working. Councillor Holmes to move.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Conservative Group have embraced neighbourhood working, and in our view it's been a hugely successful way to engage with local residents, community groups, businesses in the areas that we represent. I can say with some confidence that all of the councillors on this side of the chamber have worked hard to make it a success. The benefits of a council-supported neighbourhood framework to allow boards and forums to make decisions in their community with officer support is not just about devolved funding. I remember a specific council debate that agreed to bring in this new way of working some years ago now. I think it was Councillor Williamson who said that it would test the quality of local councillors, or words to that effect, firmly placing them as community leaders. I don't agree with him on many things, but on that, he was right. It did show the quality of councillors as community leaders, certainly in the wards that Conservative councillors represent anyway. And I'm immensely proud of the work that the councillors in my group do week after week, all year round, via the neighbourhood working framework, as it was. They've embraced the framework to deliver many positive improvements with officer support over the last 8 years or so. And many of these things delivered would seem quite small in the scheme of things, but nevertheless, they've had a really significant impact and made a real difference, despite more recent cuts to our funding or funding in non-Labour areas to the neighbourhood devolved funding. Mickleover and Alistry, for example, they haven't had the money to allow anything other than delivering very small and modest improvements. But yet, those two wards that suffered the most from the move away from equal funding, they're £5,000 or £6,000. They've made it count. A paltry amount when compared to other wards such as Normanton and Arboretum, but they've made it count. And more importantly, the framework in place allowed via the boards and the forums improvements, funding and priorities to be delivered for the community by the community, and that's very important to remember. And the ability to put forward and prioritise local highway schemes at a local level by those who know their area and have a very clear understanding of what they would like to be delivered was also a very positive thing. And there's little doubt on this side of the chamber as well that the centrally driven priorities under this administration clearly won't be focused on delivering priorities and improvements across all areas of Derby fairly. Regardless of deprivation indices or other statistics that could be referenced, adopting a policy of targeted funding damages you more than you can imagine. And I say with confidence that what you did with regards to this targeted funding in the neighbourhood framework contributed significantly to you losing Derby North. I know because I made sure of it. And, it wasn't the Greens, Councillor Banway, it was Labour, it was you. You caused that defeat. And I would say to the Labour benches that, it's partly Councillor Banway's fault, the Derby North loss. He's driven this war on areas. It was a significant influence, I'll say that. He's personally driven this war on areas that don't vote Labour. And let me tell you, until he goes and somebody new presents a more balanced approach, to running this council, it's going to end in tears. The public would actually probably applaud you for getting rid of him, to be quite honest with you. There are many other ways to ensure that support can be given to, say, inner city wards, with the problems and issues that we all recognise that many other areas don't have. But that isn't an excuse to drive things from the centre and just destroy the neighbourhood working framework. Multiple policies are in place to ensure that those most needy in this city receive support from core services and external funding and partnership working. But this isn't just about devolved funding. It's the ability to decide on a work programme at a local level. It's also about the complete removal of the neighbourhood framework that was supported previously by this council. A huge blow. It seems that even by vastly reducing the amount of money available to Conservative wards, Councillor Banway isn't satisfied because they'll still be able to deliver some improvements and priorities they choose to do. Taking it all to the centre allows complete control, a trait we've seen time and time again from this Labour administration. Whilst public forums or something equivalent will no doubt continue in one form or another, certainly in Conservative held wards anyway, without office support, if that's the case, there's the question of how ward councillors will be able to agree with the council formally, priorities and lobby and agree funding. Even before neighbourhood working, the boards and the forums, we had the area panels. Now, I wasn't a councillor when we had the area panels, but I used to attend them. And they did a similar job, but in a broader way. They're not even suggesting that something like that framework or a watered-down version of that, there's nothing being put forward which could possibly replace the positive impact that neighbourhood framework as was delivered, even with reduced funding. There's no real evidence that this administration has looked at options to reorganise neighbourhood working in line with their budget settlement. It's just seen an amount on a spreadsheet, like the voluntary community and faith group funding, and it's gone. All or nothing, gone. But it hasn't completely gone. It's going to be partially in the centre for you to decide where you spend it. I'm urging you to think again on this. Recognise the success of neighbourhood working and put back in place a similar structure to allow councillors and their communities to deliver for their area. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Councillor Poulter.
I reserve my right, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kerr.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm afraid again, because people seem to hate debating amendments, I have an amendment which I would like to speak to.
Do you have a seconder for the amendment, Councillor?
I'm seconding it and reserve my rights to speak. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I hope most people have had a chance to read through the amendment, but it does two things. It slightly expands the important roles that the original motion highlighted that we have as councillors in our neighbourhoods. And it also acknowledges the tight budget situation and the direction that the Labour group has led this council through the budget process recently. And it seeks to find a way between those two to say that neighbourhood working is very important and we need to maintain it as far as we can, because it's part of our role as community leaders and as representatives of local people that we are able to do the list of items here to enable councillors to propose highway schemes, which was mentioned before, to talk about Section 106 spending, which is the planning gain that you get from planning applications sometimes. And we need to be able to have the opportunities to communicate, so in terms of public meetings, and we want to continue to work with officers from all departments on those local issues, which are often the things which local people contact us about, from emptying bins to filling potholes and all the things in between. It was the Liberal Democrats who were the first party on Derby City Council that raised the importance of having a more local structure. And it was introduced after Labour, I think in the 2002 Act, said we needed to have some sort of neighbourhood working. And we had the area panels, which were mentioned before, and we had the ward-based neighbourhood boards that we're working to at the moment. The last official board meeting in Littleover is on the 30th of March. I think it's probably the last one that will be scheduled. But people in Littleover are saying they would like them to continue. And I think that in many other parts of the city, they would like them to continue. And I think we have a duty to our electorate to enable that to happen. So I am hoping that this can be accepted to give a structure for the continuing local role for ourselves as representatives onto this council, and I hope it is something which won't have any financial implications and therefore can be accepted also by the majority group.
Thank you. Councillor Banwhite.
Mr. Mayor, the Labour Group will support the amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whilst it's clear that the Liberal Democrats and apparently the Labour Group support the thrust of our motion, this group, our group, will be sticking with our original motion, because at the end of the day, we will be going into the elections in May on the stance, making it absolutely clear to the residents of the city that we will restore an element of devolved funding to the neighbourhoods of the city to enable them to be empowered and to be engaged and take an active role in their own communities. And that's the stance we will take. In relation to the bullet points that are included in this amendment, every single one of those will have to be done by this authority anyway, and that's why Councillor Banwhite can agree to them. He's already agreed, I understand, in principle to having consultation in respect of items on the local transport plan. 106 spending it's a requirement to consult with local councillors, although in my view far too late in the process. And as for the other two items, constitutionally and ethically, those two things would have to happen in any event. So we will be voting against this amendment and sticking to our original motion. Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Okay, so no further speakers. Can I move to the vote on the amendment, please? Show of hands, please. Those against? The amendment is carried. So I'm now going to move to the vote on the substantive as amended. Do you want to say something?
Just very briefly, Mr. Mayor, you know, there is some common ground here. As Councillor Poulter has said, it doesn't go far enough for us. I've said in my opening presentation of this motion, before it was amended, the importance of neighbourhood framework as was. Now, that's what we were calling for. This group is committed, as Councillor Poulter said, to bringing back an element of devolved funding, because it does work, it does deliver. Centrally funded, centrally decided is not the way to go for this. We need a framework, a solid framework with devolved decision making at councillor level that involves communities, neighbourhood boards, versions of neighbourhood boards or versions of forums. That's what we want. That's what we will be presenting to the electorate of this city in the May elections. And that's what we are sticking by, and that's what we put forward in our original motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'm going to move to the... You summed up. Okay, I'm going to move to the vote now on the motion as amended. Those in favour? Thank you. Those against? Those abstaining? As amended. Motion 21, swimming facilities. Councillor Grimmadale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Those of us who can swim will remember where they learnt, and I'm proud to say that I learnt to swim at Reginald Street Baths. Well done. Swimming is so important, Mr. Mayor, and I think the motion really speaks to itself. Derby's much-loved Moorways swimming pool must not face closure at the end of this month. We have great swimming in this city. We have champions who train at Moorways, Commonwealth silver medalist Molly Renshaw, world-class swimmer Adam Peatley, international swimmer Ross Davenport. 1,200 young people use Moorways swimming pool every week, and that will be lost. And that's a quote from Derbyshire Amateur Swimming Association. The fear is that the next PT, Davenport and Renshaw, will be lost due to Labour's decision of closure. The future of swimming in Derby is at serious risk. We are trying to get children to lead healthier lives and to tackle obesity. This controlling group should consider a 6-month extension for Moorways swimming pool in the new municipal year, at least 6 months, until viable alternatives are given. Councillor Banwaite said, and I quote, "The authority was now in talks with interested parties on taking over the pool, but he couldn't name them because he didn't want to jeopardise any deal." And I'd just like to know what happened to that. Councillor Shanker said, "Meetings have been scheduled with the charitable trust seeking a site for the city. Positive meetings have been held with groups, including the Amateur Swimming Association, to find external funding." And I'd like to know what's happened to that. With all the pools in the city open, that's Queen Street, Moorways, Lonsdale, Woodlands and Gayton, the total water area is something like 2/3 of their recommended by the Amateur Swimming Association for a 250,000 population, a city like Derby. With the closure of the family pool at Queen Street and the closure of Moorways, the water space reduces to 1/3 of the ASA recommendation. And that is in a city benefiting from international publicity of Derby's swimmers on the worldwide scene. Now let's look at Queen Street Leisure Centre. Queen Street Leisure Centre has 3 pools, the gala, the teaching pool and the family pool. The family pool has now been shut since November the 24th, over 3 months. Scaffolding is now being erected for the first stage of repairs. An extensive investigation is now required. The ceiling has to be removed and the roof inspected. The investigation work will take at least 10 weeks and cost approximately £90,000. This cost will increase if any unanticipated problems occur. Any solution to fix the damage based on current information is likely to take up to 12 months. That's 12 months to fix that pool. The pressure is immense on Queen Street Leisure Centre, with several clubs requiring pool time, along with those wanting to learn to swim and those just wanting to swim for pleasure. Queen Street Gala Pool is regularly closed at weekends to host gala events. I think the Labour group should consider whether they are thinking of closing the right pool. Moorways should stay and Queen Street probably go. And if I can quote Councillor Banwaite again, he said, "We remain committed to delivering a new swimming pool for the city." And I just would like to know when and how that's going to be achieved. The proposed disappearance of leisure swimming facilities by the Labour group is letting down the very young, teenagers, the elderly, the disabled and families, everyone who wants to use public leisure swimming facilities. Derby Phoenix Swimming Club fears for the future of Lonsdale Pool. They fear for the future of swimming in the city because the places you can go to are being shut down. The majority of their members are 16 and under, and that is the case for other clubs in Derby. So all these proposed swimming cuts have a huge impact on the young. And before we hear the same old record, which I sometimes hear, savage government cuts, let's take a look at Nottingham, just down the A52. They have 7 public pools, including a 50-metre pool, and they're all staying open. And like every other UK city, they are having government cuts too. How much money is being wasted in Derby on leisure facility consultancies by Labour instead of getting on with a new pool? I've just described, Mr. Mayor, a complete lack of clarity by the controlling group in regard to a viable leisure strategy for the city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder for that?
Second, and reserve my right to speak.
Okay, Councillor Ward. Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have an amendment to put forward, please.
Do you have a seconder for that amendment, Councillor Rawson? You've got copies? Okay, Councillor Rawson. Do you have a seconder for that motion as well, please? Councillor Banwaite.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council does absolutely recognise the importance of swimming provision in this city and is indeed very concerned about the loss of Moorways swimming pool. which is, I have to say, Councillor Grimmadale, a direct consequence of the cuts imposed on this council by your Tory government. It's all very well trying to pretend that's not the case and making comments like it's a broken record, but that doesn't get away from the reality of the situation, that the cuts that this council is facing and the closure of Moorways is a direct result of Tory government cuts. I don't know how you have the audacity, Councillor Grimmadale, quite honestly, to bring this motion from your group, because it's a bit like David Cameron acting surprised when the Conservative leader of Oxfordshire County Council wrote back to him, letting him know that somebody somewhere in government was cutting back on local authorities. Very strange and rather disingenuous. This amendment, Mr Mayor, is needed because there is no lack of clarity regarding the leisure strategy. This Labour administration is absolutely committed to the building of a new swimming facility, likely to be on the existing Moorways site. There's a number of good reasons for locating a new facility there. The land's already in council ownership, there's accessible, good car parking facilities, and the utilities such as high volume water mains are already connected to the site. So, Mr Mayor, despite the Tories' austerity, Labour has ambition for this city for a 50-metre, 10-lane Olympic standard pool. That's our ambition, that's what we want to do. The only thing that's holding us back is the lack of capital funding thanks to your government's cuts, Councillor Grimmadale. But we are absolutely committed to providing a new pool for the city. We're not discouraged by the obstacles that the Tories are putting in our way. We will deliver. It'll just take a little bit longer than we would all wish. Officers are still working on the leisure strategy and will be reporting back to Cabinet shortly on detailed options for moving the project forward. We are also still in talks with the private and voluntary sector to see what we can collectively do in the short and the medium term to keep Derby swimming. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, led by myself as a Cabinet member and Councillor Shanker, whose ward Moorways is located. This Labour administration would be more than happy to keep Moorways open in the medium term, subject, Councillor Grimmadale, to central government providing us with the 214,000 annual revenue funding and up to 500,000 capital, which may be required for property maintenance. If you're able to lobby government ministers and local MPs to be able to deliver that, then of course we'll be more than willing and able to deliver your requests. As we've mentioned earlier, central government has recently splashed out 300 million in so-called transitional funding, including giving additional 23 million to Surrey County Council. Derby and virtually all urban authorities got zero, by the way. The funding was granted for no apparent reason other than the minister had a load of Tory MPs turning up complaining in his office. So I'm sure, Mr Mayor, that there is no reason why the Tory government won't make this funding available to Derby to ensure that we can keep Moorways open, if only our own Conservative MPs would stand up for Derby in the same way.
Mr Mayor, under CP 48, I would challenge that this amendment has negated the original motion.
Mr Mayor, I've considered under CP 48 the suggestion by Councillor Holmes. However, I don't believe that this amendment negates the terms of the motion. And my understanding of the original motion that has been put forward by Councillor Grimmadale, for me, the topics are that the Council recognises the importance of swimming provision in the city. Another key element of the motion is there is a commit to the building of a new swimming facility. And another key element to the substantive motion is and to commit to ensuring that swimming provision remains on offer. For me, I feel that the amendment that is being proposed does address all of those three factors, which for me are the substance of the motion being discussed at present.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stanton, you indicated you wish to speak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I find this amendment quite shocking. I mean, this motion quite shocking, really. a bit of both. We'll wind that back. In fact, we'll wind it all the way back. We'll wind it all the way back to 2010, June 17th. Because on June the 17th is when you announced, the coalition announced that they were going to cut free swimming to under 16s and over 60s. Prior to that, it was free. So when you come to this chamber and champion swimming and leisure facilities in this city, remember, you cut them, okay? And so when we look back at that, it's not just the under 16s, it's vitally important, not just as an activity and fitness and all the things you spoke about, but from a safety aspect that kids learn to swim. It also meant that free swimming for under 16s was a very cost-effective and cheap day out for a family activity, something they can do together. Also, for elderly people, those over 60, it was somewhere they could go, swim for free. It was great for their mobility, for their social life. All got cut. So when this might be a measure that actually detracts away from the swimming in the city, that may be the case. But it started in 2010, and it started with those cuts and has carried on with the austerity measures that have led to this. And it isn't about necessarily the champions that we're going to produce, but it's about those kids who won't learn to swim. And it's about those older people who won't maintain their mobility. So let's not have these piecemeal motions that are just for, political pamphlet filling, and instead, let's look back at the root cause. And it's also really worrying when we start citing other cities. We have to, when we cite other cities, and instead of looking at the actual funding situation of other cities, instead we talk about consultancy or we talk about waste, then we hide from the public the actual gravity of the situation facing this city. How our situation of funding is different to Nottingham, is different to Surrey, is different to a lot of places in the city. And by doing that, by making it seem about petty internal politics in this chamber, we hide from them that actually there is a fair deal for Derby that needs to be championed. And that actually, if it was a cross-party calling for that fair deal for Derby, perhaps if Amanda Salloway and Pauline Latham were banging on the door, we'd have got some of that 300 million. But they're not. Instead, we're trying to score petty points on these motions in this chamber. And frankly, it's just piecemeal, and it's not worthy of this chamber.
Interesting one, this. It would be advantageous, particularly for wards on the south side of the city, like yours, Alan, or like mine, to retain Moorways. And indeed, I would feel less embarrassed in a way when I walk down the streets of Ulverston and Chellaston, or Chestnut Avenue where I live, and I see the old boys going off to do the swimming at Moorways. But let's, people you know as well as me, but let's in reality look at this. The base rate is low in terms of the council tax, and we know why it is. Because systematically, and this has been a cross-party thing, dependent upon who's been in control, we have set low council tax because we have elections 3 years out of 4. We've not taken that step. And when we did, we've all suffered at the ballot box as a result. So we've been cautious about doing that. And it's come back, if we're being totally honest about it, like a wet fish on the back of a net. Because our ability to raise money on an increase on the council tax is in a much worse and vulnerable position than Nottingham. So it isn't a good comparator with respect. The other point is, of course, that Moorways is a much shorter pool, so Councillor Bayliss tells me, and he would know, than Queen Street Bass. I think the standard is 50 metres and Moorways is 34. It seemed long enough, even 10 years ago, when I used to swim it with my lad. To me it did. But the important thing is, with both of those buildings, both of those structures need significant civil engineering work on them. And that's under investigation. And in terms of Queen Street, you've already referenced that. And Moorways, well, we know it's going to cost a lot of money, and it will need to be done. And I can't see any private venture wanting to take that on if they can't cover their own running costs. So I think the Cabinet's being creative in trying to do what it's doing. Now, the other thing I would like to draw your attention to, UKIP have canvassed quite widely, certainly in Ulverston, and I imagine in Mackworth, about, perhaps not so much there, retaining Queen Street Baths. Have we got an opinion from UKIP tonight on this issue? They seem to have gone home about 10 minutes after the questions finished. I hope that the people of Ulverston and Mackworth note that, because whilst they may not like the mechanisms of the council and may use it to their advantage where they see fit, if you're going to be participant in this council fully, you should be sat there having the debate. They've gone home. I assume they've gone home. I don't know where they've gone. I think Councillor Graves has left his plinth. Perhaps that's wide up and he'll jump back in a minute. But we ought to be very clear about that. All the parties are here, across the benches. That's UKIP's contribution, a swivel chair turn round. I rest my case, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Bayliss.
Councillor Titley has stolen most of my thunder, Mr Mayor, so next time I'm not going to brief you on more ways, Paul. But the substantive point to make is that in terms of finance and this council, Councillor Rawson has made the issue about government funding and has been cut for Derby, and the effects of that has been compounded by the fact we've got low council tax. I had some information supplied to me by the Director of Finance the other day. It showed that Derby's council tax is the second lowest in the East Midlands. Nottingham, since you raised it, is the 38th. The difference between the two is £16 million in round figures, somewhere around that, a year. And I'm sure if we got that money in our coffers every year, as Councillor Rawson has said, we could spend the £3 million, we've got £13 million to spend. And with that sort of money, we could build a proper 50-metre pool. And there's no doubt, at some point in the future, we will do that. There's a commitment to do that, because I use Queen's on a regular basis. The building is Art Deco, but falling apart, and it's in better state than Moorways when I went round that. But the commitment here is to do that. But we have to acknowledge the fact is that the council base is low in terms of council tax, and the other substantive funding element is the grant we get from government, and that's been viciously squeezed. And we've got no money from this transition grant, and I wonder why. And so we need to recognise that the funding for Derby has been unfairly allocated. In fact, we get no actual benefit from the fact that we're actually a low council tax authority. In the past, I remember being in the old chamber, getting hammered by the Tories saying, you know, you're taxing people, we're putting the tax up too much. Well, yeah, we are a low council tax authority. That has given us absolutely no benefit when you get the vicious Tory cuts coming in as we got now. So just think on a bit. We will deliver this. It'll take us a bit longer, and I thank God this is a prudently run council. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Mulway?
Is it seconded?
You're seconding it? Yeah. Okay. Do you want to speak on it? Okay, so I'm going to move to a vote then on the amendment. Those in favour? Those against? The amendment is carried. Councillor, what is it to speak? Do you wish to speak on the, as a seconder?
Yeah, I'm now speaking on an amended motion, but fair
sorry.
enough. I'm not seconding an amended motion. I stood in this chamber and argued with a Labour majority at one time where we had a leisure chairman called Councillor Brocklehurst, the late Councillor Brocklehurst, who argued that it was quite the right thing to close Reginald Street baths. It just shows that what goes around comes around, and I'm doing it again. We've been told, and the public has been told, that you're going to build this wonderful thing at River Lights. It was gone through all the planning process, lots of money was spent on it, then you dropped it. Now, you can do one thing by promising the public a swimming pool and taking it away, but you can't keep doing it. The public in the gallery tonight have sat through this meeting to listen to what we're going to do about Moorways. They want to keep it open. You're going to close it. We know that. Whatever happens this evening, you're going to close it. And you're going to have to live with the political flow out of that. And that'll be short term. In the long term, you probably won't be on this council, but some child is going to drown. And that will be on your conscience. That is the case because somebody is not going to learn to swim. It's the case. There are other ways of providing Moorways swimming pool. Keep it open until you've got something to replace it with. That's all we're asking. Keep the two going. Now, it's always been the policy of this administration to say savage government cuts cause us to do this. We know that all the time. And you tell the public that so that they'll all vote against the government. Well, it didn't work, did it? It's time you found another tactic to make people vote for you. Because it didn't work in May, it didn't work locally, and it didn't work nationally. If you can't run Moorways, throw the towel in. Find someone who can and keep it open. There are plenty of organisations out there. Yes, you're talking to them, but get on with it so the people in the gallery can go for their swim. That's all they're asking.
Councillor Matthew Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I don't think this council should be short-sighted. I totally agree with Councillor Wood that we had a leisure strategy moving forward that would have delivered a pool, a new city pool, but this administration has dithered. And I think actually we need to learn the lessons moving forward of the arena project. You know, we've got to deliver a swimming provision that not only the city needs but the city wants. And it has to not only be a commercial success but a significant draw from our region, and also offering significant benefits to the city. And actually that's why this group is committing to, under a Conservative-led council, the delivery of a water park leisure complex. It'd be delivered with a commercial partner. It would deliver a swimming complex that would be complete with features such as flumes, lazy river or a space bowl or similar, along with children's play structures. A very positive commercial swimming complex. But it will also deliver traditional pool offer, seating for spectators, as well as configurable training pools. That's our vision. And we're confident that we can deliver it, and we could deliver it quickly if we had control of this council. And what we need to hear from this administration are what your plans are. Because quite frankly, you've dithered for far too long on this issue. And that dithering has led to the pending closure of Moorways. And it's created a situation where Queen Street also is not fit for purpose. You need to get on with this. You've had enough years to get this going, moving forward. You pulled the leisure strategy for the city swimming pool. It's not good enough. You've heard what our vision is. Now it's time for you to put your vision on the table.
Thank you. Councillor Banwaite, do you wish to?
Mr. Mayor, we have austerity deniers. And you could forgive them if they didn't have a television set or they couldn't read the newspaper, they couldn't see the internet. But we're talking about a government policy, national government policy. Where have they been for the last 5 years? We talked earlier on about you just need to look at the national papers, and George Osborne's talking about more cuts to public spending. I mean, they're sitting there in denial. They're looking down, they're talking to each other. They're completely in denial that there is an austerity in this country. An austerity programme, a cuts programme, which they support. Now, Mr. Mayor, they make it virtually impossible to respect them. How can you respect Conservative on a local level and their supporters? Some of them, maybe in their chamber today, that voted Tory, voted for austerity on a national level, then moan about cuts when it impacts locally. And it's not just the council. When you talk about us, it's no longer us. The public on the doorstep. And if you remember in the early days, we got criticised, the Labour councils moaning, can't get on with it. That doesn't happen anymore. Because Conservative councils are complaining about cuts. David Cameron's own mother is complaining about cuts. The leader of Oxfordshire the very constituency where the Prime Minister represents, the Tory leader there has complained about cuts. In fact, it's written, it's well publicised. Have you not read the papers? Do you not read? You sit here, you come here and say austerity and cuts doesn't exist. You're completely, you're deluding yourselves. And you're trying to think the public somehow don't understand that themselves. Where are you? And Councillor Woods, you're an intelligent bloke. You should know better. Do you not read the papers? Do you not, when you read a newspaper that says the Prime Minister is going to cut public spending, what do you think the impact of that is? It doesn't exist. There's no impact. There's not an impact on the National Health Service. There's not an impact on the police. There's not an impact on local council services. And let's talk about how you're using, again, this issue. The opportunities. You bring this motion here when the budget has already been set. Let's talk about the actual... Let's educate you, Councillor Woods. You've been a councillor for a long time. You know the process. You're hoping the public doesn't understand the process. That's why you brought the motion. You're trying to exploit this. Well, let me remind you, Councillor Woods. Maybe you've already switched off. Maybe because you're going to retire, you've completely switched off. Well, let's remind you here. We've just had an 8-week budget consultation. The plans have been out there. I said in Cabinet several months ago to Councillor Hickson, if you're serious about helping us save public services, and if it's something we've missed, because you go on about there are things we could have missed here, what did I say in this council chamber? I said to Councillor Hickson, with the chief exec here, and I know it panicked him a bit because going through the budget is a big process, I said I'll make all our officers at your disposal to help you find alternatives. Absolutely find alternatives, to present an alternative budget to this council chamber. Now, we did that in opposition, a costed budget. You're meant to be part of... Your big champion on national level is you manage finances, it's about prudent government. Well, it's your opportunity as Conservatives in opposition to put an alternative. Show us costed. Show us what you would cut as an alternative. Did you take advantage of that process? No, you did. No, you didn't. Absolutely not. And that is an absolute evidence of either incompetence or genuine attempt to actually delude the public by bringing this motion here when the budget has already been set. So your opportunity, you've missed it. So I actually feel sorry for those members of the public that you've probably engaged. You've said, look, we're going to put a motion in, we're going to save more ways. Come along to the chamber, come along. What's your alternative? And I come back to this point again. The fact is, you support government cuts. You are Tories. You support this national Tory policy, which is about cuts in public services, and you've got the audacity to come to this council chamber and say you're defenders of public services. That's an absolute disgrace. Absolute disgrace. You should be absolutely ashamed of yourselves. And Councillor Holmes, looking at his phone now, you're completely isolated. And Mr. Mayor, the final point I'd make, that would just nail this, is you're also the same Tories that refused on an extension on council tax. So the very mechanism that perhaps on a local level we could have raised additional cash in that time to save these services, you oppose that as well. And most importantly now, you're opposing Fair Deal for Derby. So there is a Fair Deal for Derby campaign you support. It's not called Fair Deal for Derby. It's not. You interrupt because you don't like what I'm saying. Clearly you don't want to support a Fair Deal for Derby campaign, but you clearly will support a Fair Deal for Conservative councils campaign. That is the reality, Councillor Poulter. That is the reality. You should be absolutely ashamed of yourself.
Councillor Grimmadale, do you wish to sum up?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. I was really waiting for you to say swimming pools, but no, you don't, do you? I mean, Councillor Banwaite, you are at this moment in time the leader of the Labour group. How are you going to deliver a swimming pool facility? You can't. And what is your future swimming vision? Future swimming, you haven't got one. The Conservatives, when we take power later this year, we will deliver a vision. We will look for commercial partners, we will have a water park, and we'll have a swimming pool. We can do this. Mr. Mayor, what has this city got to look forward to with this council group in control? No leisure offering, no swimming, no cultural offer, no assembly rooms. The marketing bonfire scrapped, Symphonia Viva Derby Park concert gone, and wait for it, no Christmas lights this year. An impotent controlling group presenting a Scrooge city. I'll move to the vote. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right, I'm going to move to the vote on the substantive vote as amended. Those in favour? Thank you. Those against? Those abstaining? Motion carried. Item 23, notice of motion, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Councillor Eldrick to move.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, Mr Mayor, I'd like to thank all of the individuals, both from my own ward and across the city, who've written to me and my Labour colleagues, voicing their concerns about TTIP and the potential impact on the public sector and the people of Derby. I know that there are many groups across the city who are working on these issues and who are passionate about these issues, and I think that it's a credit to this city that we have such a vibrant civil society and people who are active on issues both within the city and globally. So, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP, it's a trade deal currently being negotiated between the EU and the US government. Negotiations are set to conclude in 2016, having been ongoing for a couple of years. The EU chief negotiator, a couple of weeks ago after the last round of negotiations, said that things would now pick up pace and negotiations would move forward more quickly in order to meet a 2016 deadline. That means that, this motion is very timely and this is the right moment for us to be considering the issues around TTIP. There could be a deal on the table and in front of EU politicians in 2017. There are many aspects to the deal, but it's not a traditional trade agreement which seeks simply to reduce border tariffs on exports, as tariffs between the US and the EU are already very minimal. The agreement, in fact, also seeks to cut regulatory barriers to trade, cut costs and red tape, making it easier for companies on both sides of the Atlantic to access each other's markets. The deal would also introduce the concept of investor-state dispute settlement. If I'll say that once, I won't say it again. Corporate courts are also being called. Essentially, courts which enable companies to sue governments if they act against their commercial interests. Mr Mayor, I stand here, I don't claim to be an expert on TTIP. I'm sure there are many other people in the room who know more about it than I do. But from everything that I've read and what I've been told by concerned members of the public in Derby and groups, I think we need to look at this deal in more detail. And I think we need to look at the potential impact on our city. Firstly, because the deal could have a significant impact on the public sector and the way public services are delivered. And secondly, because it could have a significant impact on employment within the city and employment standards, and that's something which is very important, obviously, to us within Derby and to us as councillors. And I think that we owe it to the people that we represent to be considering issues such as this and looking at them in detail and being able to have a fully informed debate amongst ourselves, but also to make recommendations as we see fit. So, Mr Mayor, this motion is simply about finding out more and giving the Chamber the opportunity to be better informed, to take appropriate action should we see fit, to debate the issues and understand the likely impact and risks of TTIP as and when it comes into force. I trust that the expertise of our officers to do this research, and also that we will engage with any relevant groups within the city to get their views and get the experience or get their expertise and knowledge so that we're painting a full picture of what is likely to happen. So on that basis, I urge members to support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Grave, I understand you're seconding the motion.
I am indeed, Mr Mayor. Thank you. Council, this motion may on the face of it deal with things very abstract and remote, and on an issue which many feel is a topic that should be left to others to get on with and has no relevance to us as a council. The fact is, however, on what is already in the public domain, the impact of TTIP would have far-reaching consequences for us as a council and more widely on the day-to-day lives of the citizens we serve. TTIP is primarily a deal to cut tariffs and regulatory barriers to trade between the US and EU countries, making it easier for companies on both sides of the Atlantic to access each other's markets. We want to gain, as the EU, freer access to the US. But of course the converse is the case as well. The US is able to get access to our markets. And that's my main cause of concern. Figures put out to justify the agreement quote a net annual surplus to the UK economy of £7 billion. Quite a hefty sum. On, you may say, the naive assumption that every UK citizen would equally benefit from this surplus, this would amount to £110 per year per capita. That's £2.11 per week for all of us. That's ostensibly the plus side. But it opens the door to multinationals, a great many of which are based in the US. Absolutely anything is up for grabs by companies unless exclusions as specified and agreed. Councillor Eldred already referred to the ISDS. In an ISDS operation, the claim is resolved outside existing state legislation in a separate process through a special tribunal meeting behind closed doors. TTIP is set to contain an ISDS provision. In the UK, such claims are at present made through the judicial process in the law courts, and the courts weigh the public interest against the commercial interest. Public interest has to be taken into account. ISDS tribunals currently operating around the world are concerned only with the commercial interest, wholly excluding consideration of the public interest. I offer you just 2 examples of where ISDS tribunals are resolving claims. Philip Morris is suing Uruguay and Australia over plain packaging for tobacco. Veolia is suing the Egyptian government as it has the cheek to be introducing the Egyptian minimum wage. There is a clear public interest dimension in both cases. It won't be considered. Mr. Mayor, we all know that this Tory government would dearly like to privatise our NHS. We also know that this is not the wish of the British people. What do Tories do to further their dearly cherished wish? They privatise by stealth. Has the government sought to specifically exclude the NHS from TTIP? Well, talks on the NHS are still on the table for discussion and seem to be taking a long time. Remember, exceptions need to be specifically written into the final TTIP document. If the NHS is not exempted from TTIP, it is a certainty that US private medical companies will try to gain a foothold. TTIP's regulatory convergence agenda seeks to bring our standards on food safety and the environment close to those of the US. In the US, growth hormones are routinely used on beef cattle, even though there is a clear link to cancer. We don't import US beef if it contains growth hormones. We will be soon. Remember the £2 a week we'll all get? That's 2.99p burgers at McDonald's, thank you. I'm loving it. It has been admitted that TTIP will probably cause unemployment as jobs switch to the US, where labour standards and trade union rights are lower. Our leadership role in the community dictates that we should look outside the boundaries of the city and identify issues which can impact on the individuals, families and businesses that we serve. Our comparatively high workplace standards in the city are under threat. The quality of our food is under threat. Our NHS is under threat. Global corporations will be at our door, driving down wages, moving jobs away from Derby into areas where they think they can pay less, increasing personal and family insecurity, and of course, evading tax as a matter of course. I would submit, Mr. Mayor, that the issues I have put forward above make it clear that it is right and proper that TTIP should be a matter of our concern as a council. We should seek further understanding of the potential TTIP poses. No doubt, a further debate will follow, a more informed debate.
Thank you. Councillor Kay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Hazelgrave has just highlighted there some of the things that people are rightly concerned about. And it's always difficult when things are being negotiated and you're not part of sitting around the table. You can always fear that the worst is happening. And I think we need to be careful on this because through the years, through the centuries, there have been negotiations between countries time and time again. One of the advantages of these discussions is that they have got some democratic oversight through the EU. And they've got some sort of, I think, probably lesser democratic oversight in the US. What we, as voters, shouldn't be frightened of is using our strength through our representatives in Europe to make sure that the issues that we care about are being discussed and are being considered, and those that can do us damage are being safeguarded from. So it oughtn't to be a matter of going down to the lowest common denominator in terms of regulations. We should be learning to pull up those regulations and to make sure that the US has as high standards as we have, where we exceed theirs, and that we can learn from them and increase our standards to have a better standards here than we do at present. And there are examples both ways. There was an example on labour rights that has already been mentioned. And you could say that the US are ahead of us, where they've already dealt with microplastics, which are polluting our world more and more, whereas we still allow them in all sorts of different materials. So it is an important issue. It is also an issue relevant to Derby. It's something that we need to be, or we should be, aware of. But I don't think it's something that we need to expect our officers to become the experts in. We belong to an organisation, the Local Government Association, which has already looked into this, and they have done some very digestible briefings. They did one last year, they've done one just last month, or sorry, January, I think, and to bring members who want to know what is happening up to speed. And I therefore would like to propose an amendment which takes away the responsibility from our overworked officers to do the research and can rely on central resources which have already been, where the resources have already been spent. Because, as you members will know from other things I've said this evening, I acknowledge that we do have a challenge.
Keep it quiet, please.
We do have a challenge in this council to be able to achieve all the things we want to achieve with the staff that we have. So I hope that you'll accept the amendment, which I think achieves the same outcome, but without needing the resource of our own people.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder for the amendment, Councillor Cask? Councillor Skelton, do you wish to speak now? Or?
Mr Mayor, the Labour Group will be supporting this amendment.
Councillor Titley, you've got your...
Never mind, Philip, I'll be short. I realise there's people been here since early this morning who've done a day's work, and more light-heartedly, Councillor Bayliss has promised to buy me a pint of best bitter tonight, so that's not an offer you turn down too readily. But the issue is this, for me. When I was leaving work about 3 years ago, this was starting to come up on the radar screen, and it is really important, because if you imagine by the end of this year, it's not inconceivable, but not a pleasant thought, you might have Donald Trump in the White House. And if you have that, you'll have somebody who's going to chase this like a dog chases its dinner. This will be used as a one-way direction of travel. It will be used, and it'll be encouraged to be used by the then American government if that prophecy comes, that terrible prophecy comes into being, to pursue our National Health Service, to pursue our workers in local government, because they will be about offering shareholder value. It will not be value to the customer, people who use those services, and it certainly won't be of any value, I don't think, to our valued staff, or indeed the health service of this country. Now that's putting it in simple terms, because that's what I understand, but this is not a good thing in its current form. It certainly needs to be modified. I've said enough. We can all agree on that.
Thank you then. So, I'm going to move to the vote on the amendment. All those in favour of the amendment? Thank you. All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. The amendment is carried. Now move to the substantive with the amendment. I can't even say it, mate. I haven't even had a drink yet. Anybody wishing to speak? Sorry, I missed that one. Anybody wishing to speak? Do you want to sum up, Councillor Eldrick? Okay, so I'm going to move to the vote then on the substantive as amended. Those in favour? Okay, those against? Those abstaining? Thank you very much. Motion is carried as amended. Item 24, notice of motion, road signage. Councillor, care to Move.
If we hadn't had all the previous motions, you wouldn't have heard me speak before tonight. But I'm sorry that it's last. We all notice the road signage on our streets, and most of us, most of the time, adhere to it. And I believe that those who don't adhere to it very often do it by mistake. And I think all of us have had an email recently from somebody who failed to adhere to some road signage and was feeling very bitterly done by. Whatever the rights or wrongs of that, it is something that comes up, and I've had those sorts of comments addressed to me about other issues than the one that are addressed to all of us. And the purpose of this motion is to say that we want to work with local people, and we want to make the best of the limited resources that we have at the moment. Derby has a reputation, and I don't know exactly where it comes from, and I don't know whether it deserves it or not, because I know Derby quite well, that it has quite poor signage. People get lost here. And if we are able to involve local people, we may be able to do a better job of identifying where those problems come. Now, this isn't designed in any way to be critical of our highways officers, because I think our highways officers do an excellent job. But just as if I'm writing something that's important, I like somebody to read through it to be able to see if I've introduced any errors, any minor problems, any bad grammar, any spelling mistakes. I think it's good to have people to be able to look and give that overview. I'm also not expecting this to change things overnight. It takes about 20 years before main road signage wears out. The paint on the ground, obviously we see that replaced every few years, but main signage lasts a lot longer, thank goodness. So we're not expecting radical changes, but I think we should make a route by which people who drive round, walk round, cycle round our city can approach us and say it would be better if. Now, I also know that our staff don't have the resources to receive those comments from all 200,000 people who are wandering around Derby on any given day. And that's why I've suggested that we get in touch. We encourage organisations that are already working with groups of people to get in touch with us, and they can hopefully filter the comments. So I'm not putting any way a limit on which organisations we contact, and I think we should have an open door so that other organisations want to come forward, maybe motoring, what do you call them? Driving schools, or various lorry companies may wish to contact us and say what their concerns are from their perspective. And I think if we do that, and if we have a system set up, we may be able to get that balance better on the number of signs where we
Excuse me, Councillor Kerr,
and what they say.
can we have just a little bit of quiet, please?
So I'm not expecting this to be working miracles. I'm expecting it to be in a step in direction. But overall, I think it's working with local people at a time when we need to make best use of limited resources.
Thank you. Councillor Skelton, do you wish to speak? Okay, thank you. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to speak on this, not because, as I've been accused, trying to stop you watching Channel 4 at 10:30 tonight, but this is about Derby, and it's something we can do something about, unlike the last motion. Councillor Kerr is right in many ways, but it's not just the people of Derby that need directional signs. In fact, the people of Derby rarely need directional signs. It's the visitors to Derby, the people who come here to do business with us, people who come here for tourism and put money in our economy. They are the people who need good signs. They come through, say at Spondon on the A52, a sign saying, "Welcome to the city of Derby." In miles ahead of that, they come to Pentagon Island, where there are signs all round saying, "To the city." Well, what city? They're already in the city. Very confusing. Now, Councillor Kerr said these things are changed every 20 years. Well, go down Lodge Lane. There's one that's been there since the 1950s. And the government has paid for that to be changed umpteen times, and we've never spent the money. I think it now should have a preservation order on it, because you need to interpret it, and you need a highway code that mentions horses to understand what it's talking about. There's even signs to the cattle market pointing in entirely the wrong direction. So having got past the Pentagon Island, you might get to that inner ring road that we spent 40 years trying to get. It's called the A601, but you won't find one sign anywhere in the city of Derby mentioning the A601. Why not? The signs came before the plain English panel. We sent them back, said they weren't good enough. That's the last we heard of it, and then they abolished the plain English panel. So that's the policy that we've got at the moment for signage. A visitor to the city either has a sat-nav or a map marked as 601. It's not all those fancy names that we've given it, that we're proud of, but it's the visitors. Where are they going to go? One of the city attractions is the National Sikh Museum. And I think we're very proud of the fact that that's in Derby. So you go along Osmaston Road and you get to the road that leads up to it, Shaftesbury Crescent, and there are 2 no-through road signs. Absolutely untrue, and have been for decades. It is a through road. You can get through to the ring road, you can get through to every part of the network of the UK highways. So it's utter rubbish. I have, of course, reported this to the officers, and they say it's a matter for the neighbourhood boards and the local councillors for that ward. You represent Oakwood. What do you know about? Well, I do drive around Derby, so I know. So you carry on having ignored those signs, and you come to Pear Tree Crescent. Now, Pear Tree Crescent has not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 signs saying there's a restriction on the size of the road to 6'6", not 2 metres, it's old enough to be 6'6" wide. Now these 4 signs each have 2 lights in them. They have been burning day and night 24/7 for at least 20 years since that road was actually 6'6" wide. It's no longer 6'6" wide. Nobody has the job of taking away the signs. Nobody seems to have the job of taking down the red signs that say there's a new layout ahead. Now, I don't know how many Labour councillors it takes to change a light bulb, but you could actually, it doesn't really need an officer and a gang of works to get rid of those signs. We do, we try. All you need to do is take out those light bulbs, and you will have saved enough money over all those years to pay perhaps for a lollipop lady. Worth trying, isn't it? Or bring back the plain English panel, and we'll tell you exactly what to do. And I think if we put that to the vote, you might get a majority. I can't remember what else I was going to say, but I've got...
It's not going to last till 10:30, Robin. You've only got 40 seconds.
Well, I hope somebody else will talk and get another one and another one. But we'll keep trying. I support the motion, by the way.
Can we get Tully up on this screen? Councillor Banway.
Mr. Mayor, we have an amendment.
Councillor Banway, do you wish to speak? Or, and do you have a seconder? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, the Labour Group supports the motion. We just feel the need to make sure that obviously a lot of these activities are a discretionary activity, and obviously the points have been well made during the course of various debates that the precarious position that the council's finances are in. So this is just obviously making it clear that obviously this again does come back to making sure that the council does have the appropriate funding to be able to deliver on this, Chair. So yes, but we we're grateful for the Liberal Democrats bringing this motion, and we will support it. But we think it's just appropriate just to put that aspect in there to make sure that there is subject to funding. Thank you.
Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll be brief. We were going to support this until that. So, actually, the thing is about the amendment, this can be delivered without funding. In fact, it probably will save the council money. So it just doesn't make sense to put that amendment in there. It was perfectly fine as it was. You were very close to cross-party support on this. Unfortunately, you've gone and ruined it yet again.
Councillor Kerr.
I was going to make a very similar point to Councillor Holmes, because this doesn't cost this. We already have a highways maintenance budget, and this was only looking to make better use and more precise use of an existing budget. And I very much regret, we've actually had quite a good meeting today. I think we've had quite a lot of cross-chamber support. I think it's been a much less aggressive meeting than we sometimes have. And I think it's actually a good message to the people of Derby that people across this chamber can work together. And if I had spoken before, Councillor Holmes, I would have said this is an amendment that will lose the Conservative support. And I very much hope that my Labour colleagues will actually turn down this amendment so that we can get cross-party support on something that I think everybody genuinely agrees to. It is an unnecessary amendment, so if it's not withdrawn, and I would think it would be very nice if the leader would actually withdraw it, but if it's not withdrawn, perhaps my Labour colleagues can have the courage to say, right, let's go for cross-party support at one point at the end of this meeting, and at the end of what I think has been both a challenging and an interesting municipal year for all of us.
Thank you. Councillor Ashburn indicated he wanted to speak.
Not on this bit of this. Not now. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to move to the vote on the amendment. Those in favour of the amendment. Those against.
Mr. Mayor, can I speak on the?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Van Waite, sir.
Mr. Mayor, this is about government funding. I mean, Councillor, hang on. Let me just hang on. If you just listen, let me just teach you something. The highways maintenance budget. Where do you think that funding comes from? It comes from a combination of government, LTP, and our own funding. And Councillor Kerr, you were the cabinet member. You've been the cabinet member for highways. We've got the former cabinet member, the former strategic director for neighbourhoods. The now chief exec knows this agenda inside out. You should know full well, and you would have had advice from the highways officers to say, and this is an extraordinary admission, but successive administrations have all been, party to this. The expert advice is, at this moment in time, we should be spending about £10 million on our highways maintenance programme. Do you know how much we actually spend? We spent about £2 million. You just nodded to agree with that. So you've had that. You must have had that briefing. You've had that briefing. You must have had that briefing. Whoever was the portfolio holder for the neighbourhoods would have had the same briefing from the same officers. So to simply say the highways maintenance budget, the money's always going to be there, it's not. The reality is that the government doesn't give us enough money to adequately to meet our obligations on the highways maintenance budget. We all said that. Councillor Kerr has acknowledged that. You should know that because you would have had the same briefings. The reason we've not been able to do anything about it, why? Why have we, and it's an admission that we underfund our roads, our pavement repairs, is because we simply don't have enough money, and we've always looked to do, therefore, with the difficult choice we've had to make, that money has gone in other projects. I faced the same challenge when I was cabinet member. When we had a paper on that, when we got the advice to say, do you know you underfund your highways maintenance? I said, well, how can we put that right? And that was before austerity, may I add. And we are building up to bigger problems. The reality is the state of our roads and pavements is going to get much, much worse. Our ability to replace signage is going to get much, much worse. And again, to simply deny that the signs don't cost anything. Well, who are the officers you talk about? The point's made about officers. The officers that perform that discretionary service, the reality is, sadly, this is an area we're cutting. They're simply not, I mean, who are you going to employ to do the work? Where's the revenue funding? So you're going to be putting these signs up. So Councillor Holmes is going to put his boiler suit on and he's going to be putting up signs across the city. And next he'll be filling in potholes. But you might want to volunteer to putting in potholes, Councillor Holmes, but you're still going to have to pay for the raw materials that are going to fill the holes in. So, I mean, I love to see the Tory party going around fitting potholes in a city. So they don't want to argue for a fair deal campaign, but they will quite voluntarily go up and put up road signs across the city and fill in potholes. I mean, that's just completely, that's got to be a carry-on film in the making, surely. You know, so, but let's come back. I mean, I hope we're not going to have a scenario now. I'm not interested in the Tories here, but as I said, the Liberal Democrats have put up a sensible motion. All we're saying, and let's think about what we're saying, let's think about what it's extraordinary really. All we're saying is making sure we've got the money to pay for these activities. I challenge anybody to think that anything the council does doesn't cost money. I mean, we've had council meetings where people are putting FOI requests, they come here asking questions about quite basic activities we've performed, whether it's putting out marketing literature or consulting on whatever it might be. You know, you ask questions yourself, rightly so, we're here to be held accountable. To simply now come to this council chamber to say, actually, this is an activity that costs the council no money. It has no impact by government cuts. It would just be thin air. You'll get a ladder and put the signs up yourselves, Councillor Holmes. I mean, it's just completely balmy. You are the balmy army, aren't you, really? The balmy army, the Tories. I mean, Councillor Hickson, he's gone. I mean, we've seen him off for all his bluster and replaced with what? I mean, it's like the poorer version of Columbo. You know, so, look, the reality is, I'm not bothered about the Tories. The Tories have no credibility, the balmy army. But the Liberal Democrats, and Lucy, we've worked together on similar issues in highways, and we want to work with you on this. All we're saying, and we have sought advice from the professional officers. I said I've spoken to the Chief Exec. The advice is absolutely clear that this is a service that has been cut heavily. The highways maintenance budget is being crippled by cuts. So all we're saying is the caveat. We're not saying we won't do it. Whatever funding we've got available to this, we will look to do this. And I'm happy to speak to you, Lucy, and your appropriate councillors that are leading on this to talk about how we can take this forward. And that's a commitment from me, Councillor Kerr. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Skelton, do you want to...
Right, I think just to make some things clear, what we're actually saying was this is not something to be done in a short burst of activity like a spring clean over, you know, a short period of time. It's a gradual, ongoing evolutionary process. Councillor Wood very eloquently has given us some examples of signs that are there but shouldn't be there because they're totally misleading, and it would be useful obviously to start with those. We could indeed perhaps even get the scrap metal value for those signs. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kerr, you can sum up if you wish. I'm not sure if you want to.
I'd just like to very briefly to say that I put this motion in because we need to be creative. We need to look at new ways of doing things. We need to continue to celebrate what Derby City Council can achieve. And if we are always held back by thinking that we can't do anything without more finance, then I think we're not doing justice to the people of Derby and to our great city. And that is specifically why I said, look, we need to do this within our existing resources, but we need to do it differently. I'm sure other people can think of other ways in which the general public or groups within the general public can give us, provide us with support, give us advice, and in some cases take away some of the responsibility and time that our officers are currently paid to do, so that they can do things which only they can do. We need to work more smartly, we need to make decisions more smartly, and we need to be able to be creative in what we're doing. This, I hope, is just one thing we can do. We need to do more. Let's work together and do the best we can for everybody.
Thank you. So I'm now going to move to the vote as substantive as amended. Those in favour, Okay, thank you. Those against? Those abstaining? Motion carried. Before we go, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you all for your support throughout the last 12 months, because this will be my last meeting in this chair. Make it sound realistic at least. But anyway, I would like to thank you all those that are up for election in the coming few months. I wish you all the best. Some I hope to see here, some I don't, but just depends what but you know, but anyway, I just want to wish everybody good luck for the future anyway. And I've been asked if Councillor Wood could just make a short comment. And it's only Councillor Wood that I'm going to accept a comment from. So thank you.
That's very good of you. I can't promise to be short. Councillor Hickson, as you know, is not standing at the election and stood down as leader of this group very abruptly and quite shortly, not long ago. I've known him a great deal of time. He was still at school when I first knew him, delivering papers in Struts Park for his father's newsagents on a bicycle. And I worked with him in a very different climate, a different social, political and economic climate, when we were both fighting for LGBT rights back in the early 70s. So I got to know him quite well, and one night, rather drunkenly in a pub, when I was already on the council, but he wasn't, he said, "The planners have ruined this city." He never said Derby, he always said this city. And it wasn't me, but my then partner said, "Well, do something about it then." And he said, "Well, what can I do?" He said, "Well, actually, we've got a by-election coming up in a very safe Conservative ward called Darley, as it was in those days." And he stood, and perhaps the rest is history. But when we took control in 1988, we were looking round for people to chair the large committees. We didn't have a cabinet in those days, thank goodness. And the very challenging one was housing. There were a lot more council houses. Derby Homes didn't exist. We had a director of housing and a very different social sphere. Now, we got Philip to take on the chair of housing. He took it on with a gusto. He went and trained and learned all the legislation. And actually, you may think of him as a right-wing Tory. He wasn't always like that. And he did a great deal of good for the council house dwellers of this city. In fact, if you look back at your ancient Derby telegraphs, you will find him as a left-wing trade union shop steward picketing the DHSS in Beckett Street, as it then was. He was a very different character in those days.
Saw the light.
And fortunately, having got elected as a Conservative, he threw everything into it. Now, I'm not going to go on long, even though I would like to, but I think everybody here will remember, those who were on the council when we were meeting over the road in the assembly rooms, the occasion when he came back at very short notice. He didn't know it was going to happen. He suddenly found himself leader of the council again. And at that same meeting, he stood up and showed incredible leadership. He united this council. He going totally against the Conservative government. He exhorted everybody to join a trade union march through Derby at the time of Bombardier. He stood on a platform of all people with Bob Crow. He led a delegation of all parties to the House of Commons. Now, the political consequences for him personally were considerable. He was the chairman of the police authority. He stood a good chance of standing for PCC. That was totally cut away from him by members of his own party elsewhere in the county. He suffered a lot. He always put Derby first. And I think that was a good example, A, of leadership and putting Derby above party politics. I'm only sad that he won't be ever in that chair, Mr. Mayor, wearing that chain, because I think as a chairman of this committee, it would have been very entertaining indeed. And I think all we can do is wish him a long, happy and healthy retirement.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. On that note, I'll wish you all a good evening. Thank you.